You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. After lots of internal criticism, the Black Lives Matter organization recently decided to give $3 million to members of the black community who are financially crippled by the pandemic. There are people who are saying that, hey, BLM has taken in more than $90 million in donations. They should be doing more for local chapters, also for the community. Through the organization's BLM Survival Fund, it has been giving grants of $1,000 to black activists. Black people are certainly struggling financially due to COVID-19, and black family members who have lost loved ones at the hands of law enforcement or while incarcerated. This move comes after the foundation exclusively shared with the Associated Press this week that it took over $90 million last year. The Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation says it wants to be known for more than just protests over the deaths of African Americans who have died at the hands of police. Joining me now is Melina Abdullah, co-founder of Black Lives Matter in L.A. Melina, I got to ask you this here. I'm not quite sure who was involved in this decision, but and this is just, again, this is specifically in terms of that deal there. I got a problem as a member of the black press with Black Lives Matter movement sharing the information exclusively with the Associated Press. Now, we're going to talk about the fund as well, but the reason I have a problem with that is because as somebody who has devoted nearly all of my professional career to black media, this is one of those stories that it helps for black media to be able to share it with our people. And when an AP has been sued by African Americans, AP has serious issues with race. And I think I get AP worldwide. I just think that when black organizations have information like this, they should say, hey, AP, we're going to share it with you, but we also are going to do it with black media in order to reach our people. Please take that back to Patrice and the others, because I've seen this with other groups where they give it to the New York Times, they give it to the Washington Post, and then when they don't get covered the second and third day, then they want to come to black media.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, one of the things I've said about you is that, I've often quoted the African proverb that until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. And I've often called you one of our lions. And you're absolutely right. And that critique is well taken. There is nothing wrong with offering criticism. And I accept that. And we won't do that again. And so I can say that you're absolutely right. You and many other members of the Black press have been ones to cover Black Lives Matter when people thought we were not going to be here any longer. You continued to cover us and you continued to share the work that we were doing, and we should have reached out to you first. So I apologize.
But I certainly appreciate that. And let's talk about this fund. And so you made the announcement this $90 million has been taken in. And what exactly is this fund, and how do folks apply, how they qualify?
So we thought we were putting together a significant amount of money by creating this $3 million fund that was meant to be kind of our contemporary survival pending revolution, right? Which was a principle that was ushered in under the Black Power movement. That, you know, if you think about the Black Panther Party survival programs, it was about making sure that our people, that we offered as much as we could to make sure that our people had what they needed to survive. And so we knew that we couldn't fund every single Black person, but we thought it would go, at least a couple of days. We had $3 million set aside for $1,000 micro grants that were really no strings attached. You didn't have to demonstrate anything. You just had to say, well, why do you need the money? I can't pay my rent. I can't pay my utilities. there's medical bills, or I lost my job, my business is about to close. And as long as you were Black, you got that $1,000. That money went almost immediately. And so we're now working to raise additional resources in hopes that we'll be able to provide more funds. But we're also challenging those, especially corporations and individuals who've made massive profits in the midst of this health pandemic with an unprecedented economic fallout that disproportionately is levied upon Black folks. We're saying people like Jeff Bezos, corporations like Amazon, right, who have record profits, they can do far more than $3 million. And so we need to put pressure on them. We also need to put pressure on the government. And in some ways, a lot of folks have been comforted by the fact that the form of white supremacy that we now see isn't as blatant or violent. But when you think about what it means that we're talking about a $2,000 stimulus check, it'll partially pay for rent one time, but you have countries in this world that are saying, well, we need stimulus checks every month. And that's what we're saying, that we need stimulus checks every month. And there's organizations, there's corporations, there's individuals, and there's government that's much more well equipped to provide these kinds of dollars, beginning with the Black community, than is Black Lives Matter.
It's also important because let me be real clear for folks who are watching. What I'm about to say is not just specific to Black Lives Matter. It's also for the NAACP that's raised, my understanding, more than $100 million. Well over $100 million. That money was given because of Black people. And so, to your point about the Panthers, what Black people are saying is the money needs to be used for Black people. It needs to be judicious, and that is examining. Is it being used for internal purposes? Is it being used to fund the chapters, to fund the organizations, to fund the things that they want to do? And that really, really is critically important, because if you are, like in my case, when I ask my fan base to give, I'm saying we're spending it here. We're covering this. We're going and we're covering this. The people need to see the results of what has been done with the money.
Absolutely. And I would go further than that, actually, because more than Black Lives Matter and more than the NAACP, money was also given to white-led organizations like the ACLU, who has made far more than the $100 million in your mentioning.
Yep.
So what kind of pressure are we putting on those organizations and institutions? So you're absolutely right. The money has to go to Black community. Black Lives Matter raised roughly $90 million. There was an impact report that was released that talks about how that money has been used. That impact report says that basically we gave away about 25%, a little more than 25% of what we raised, and that's before the survival fund, to Black-led organizations to do work on the ground. So that $90 million is intended to not just go in the pockets of Black people, although there's survival money that's necessary, but also to do the work of institution building. And, you know, there's organizations that have been around. I think ACLU is over 100 years old now, right, that have had an opportunity to institution build. NAACP should be institution building, right? Institution building is also important, because if Black Lives Matter were to give away every single dollar of the $90 million, that would be the end of Black Lives Matter, and we wouldn't have the capacity to continue to do the work in the streets. I think what's recommended, and you know, I have a whole nother job, so this is also important to
Right. This is not their day job.
Right. That Black Lives Matter organizers we do this work because we know it to be our sacred duty. I believe I was called into this work by the Creator, by my ancestors, and I do this work as heart work and spirit work and soul work. But we're not being paid by the movement. And so the dollars that go into Black Lives Matter actually do direct work on the ground. And we want to make sure that we have the dollars to continue to do that direct work on the ground and build up an institution that really can be abolitionist in nature by upending unjust systems, and also abolitionist in terms of ushering in the kind of world in which we want our children to inherit.
And see, let me be. And here's the thing for people out there, and then I'm gonna go to questions from my panel. There are no issues, and I'm gonna be real clear to anybody who's watching. In order to have successful organizations, you have to have infrastructure. In order to have infrastructure, you got to be able to hire people, maintain people, keep those people. And Melina, the thing that, because if we study organizations historically, that's what SCLC, Urban League, NAACP, they all had those different things there. And so when people say, man, they sitting here getting rich, no, what you do is you're able to pay folks to live, because you can't ask people to just constantly give of themselves and not be able to pay their rent, pay their lights, pay food, send their kids to college, all those different things along those lines. But what I do hear from other Black Lives Matter chapters and activists is that you also have to, and what I'm about to say, I've heard the exact same thing from NAACP chapters. I've heard NAACP chapters say, national, y'all got to be doing more funding your state branches and your local branches. So this is not a solely BLM conversation. This is what, and look, I'm Vice President Digital for the National Association of Black Journalists. We hear the exact same thing from our chapters. This is what happens when you have organizations, and we have to recognize that, but the key here is transparency. I think the key here is constantly being transparent with what is going on so people know. And then you don't have people just with misinformation, disinformation, making up stuff, spreading lies. That's the most important thing.
Absolutely, which is why we issued the impact report. So people could see, where did that $21 million that we gave in 2020, where did it go? What organizations were funded through that money? Right. And then you're right about being able to hire and being able to have staff. I'm very fortunate that my day job that pays me gives me flexibility. I have flexibility in being able to dedicate so much time to Black Lives Matter without being paid. But it shouldn't just be that because I'm a professor and can kind of merge my paid job with my life's work, that's why I can contribute, right? It should be that people who work retail can also say, you know what, maybe I can do some work here and be compensated for that work. So we're beginning to think about how to build infrastructure, how to make sure that we have the things that we need, that we're not constantly begging for free photocopies and water and signs and people to print stuff for us for free, right? That we can use the dollars that we've generated to, again, build institution that's enduring. And that's what, really this last kind of moment of uprising, this watershed moment that did bring tremendous resources to Black Lives Matter is. And then finally, and I'll break after this, is, we need people to be a little patient. This is our first real money. We didn't have money before 6 or 8 months ago, right? Black Lives Matter was funded out of the pockets of people like me and Baba Akili and Sister Jan, who are just, I'm a professor, but I'm also a single mom, and I'm also a working class person. People can Google what my salary is, right? And so it's because I cook instead of going out that we were able to fund Black Lives Matter for the last 7 years. And so this is our first bit of money, and we want it to be righteous and deliberate with how that money is used so that we can make sure that there is a Black Lives Matter going forward for many, many years and prayerfully generations to come.
Melanie Abdullah, I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much.
All right. All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have, you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. There's been a lot of discussion dealing with Black Voters Matter in terms of where they are, their future, what they're involved in, and there are a lot of folks now who are not particularly happy with the direction of Black Voters Matter. Patrice Cullors, we had her on the show. We had her on talking about the amount of money, the donations they have been receiving, as well as their leadership. And we've seen a lot of different stories now being done where folks are saying what is happening. There are chapters that are upset with the direction of Black Lives Matter. That's what has been going on as well. The Economist, a story came out today. We have another story that came out in USA Today, and there have been others as well where chapters say they're not getting the resources that they should be getting. That all this money is coming in, but they're not actually helping folks who are on the ground. And so we want to focus on that right now with the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Oklahoma, Reverend Sherry Dickerson, and Chanel Heim. She's an organizer for Black Lives Matter in Louisville, Kentucky. And so glad to have both of you. Chanel, I want to start with you. Just your assess. First of all, let's do it this way. Because here's what people don't realize. There are Black Lives Matter chapters that are not affiliated with the Black Lives Matter Global Network. So, your Louisville, Kentucky chapter, are you affiliated with the national entity?
At this time, we are not affiliated with the national entity. And I think for us, it became very confusing this summer. And within the last year of a lot of moving around, and there wasn't a lot of answers. And so with us not being clear on what the solutions or getting any answers, we stayed away from whatever the configuration was. We're still a bit confused on what that configuration is. We just know, just like any of the other chapters that we throw down with from around the country, that whatever is going on at this new entity, I do want to make sure that people understand that this is a brand new entity. This is not the historic entity that folks have been trying to, kind of whitewash with the alt-right stuff that's going on. This is a brand new entity. And so none of us were consulted on that. And it's just been hard to support that. But it also has been feeling a bit neglected as we go through these uprising moments, and Louisville being one of those places, and not getting any support whatsoever.
So let me hold on. I want to go back to what you just said there. And folks, if I can get a little bit more audio with her, because I can barely hear. Here's what you said. It's a new entity. So here's, I think, part of the deal here. That is tough for people. That's confusing as well. And that is really understanding what the structure is. And I'll be honest with you, when I had Patrice on the show, I was confused as all get out because it was the movement for Black Lives, and then it was the Black Lives Matter Global Network. And so when you say this new entity, she named herself as executive director, right? So, and again, here's the other question. If your organization isn't a part of the national group of Black Lives Matter, why do you care?
I think it's a bit dangerous, right?
I'm just trying to understand.
Can you hear me?
Say it again.
I said, I think it's a bit dangerous in this moment where we have another large protest moment, something very new, not only to the U.S., but to the world, with everybody yelling Black Lives Matter. And in the middle of that, people who we organize with, I think people thought of us as like one big organization, and we're actually very much networked to each other. If DC asks for something, Louisville might answer. If Louisville answers something, Chicago might answer. And that's how we work. What happened was that we decided to like make sure that we had a hub that could take care of those resources or anything else and be able to spread it out to the chapters. And little by little, less answers came to that formation. And what was scary for our chapter is that we had an uprising going on, and those things were being asked of us on the ground. We had no idea what people were talking about until all of a sudden a new formation was made, and several other chapters that we organized with were left out of that as well. And us staying away from that was a clear indication to keep us safe. But also, it's just really confusing not to have the representation of what you began this chapter underneath. We got approval from Black Lives Matter, the network, when it was before this iteration of whatever this is, to be able to use the banner and be able to organize within a network of other chapters. So I think that's why it matters a bit, especially as we talk about what decentralization looks like. We've always had to take care of our research.
Okay, so this is...
This new formation is a bit weird because it's changing the narrative of where we begin.
Okay, so this is why I'm absolutely confused, and I want to bring in Reverend Sherry Dickerson here. So, for Reverend Sherry Dickerson, let me ask you: you're there in Oklahoma, okay? Are y'all a part of the Black Lives Matter Global Network, or the Movement for Black Lives, or are you an independent chapter?
Yes, we are part of the Movement for Black Lives, which is a different collective that is not the same as the Black Lives Global Network. We were recognized at one time, but we are not an affiliate at this time because they have restructured.
Okay, so let me. Here's the problem. Here's one second. Here's the problem that I have, Sherry and Chanel. First of all, let's take this thing back. When Black Lives Matter started off as a hashtag, and that thing reverberated around. It really encapsulated all of this energy that we saw out here. Then that thing reverberated all around the country. The problem is, what they did, they tried to actually then go get the trademark, but then it was too late. It had already been out in the public domain. And so essentially what they tried to do is to bring some order to something that took off in reverse. And for me, and I'm just being honest with y'all, that the struggle is even understanding what's what. So even, like I said, when I had Patrice on the show, she was explaining it, and I was kind of like, well, what's this, and what's this, and what's this, and what's this? And so now when you say there's another entity, so what are we now talking about? A third entity? So Chanel, is it, Again, and trust me, I ain't got no dog in any of this. I'm just actually confused because there's the Black Lives Matter Global Network, there's the Movement for Black Lives, and what you're saying, Chanel, is now there's a third entity, correct?
Correct. But it has been a part of that same formation that has just been coming and coming and coming. Confusing for you, confusing for chapters who organize within that structure, right? So we organize with those folks, and there's decisions that are being made. And we're not even talking about small decisions, right? There's this whole conversation of sending Biden a letter, and even the support that we see during this global rebellion for our chapters and what's happening. And that conversation is not happening with anybody. There's certain delegations that are being made for other chapters, and it's just been confusing. And I think for those chapters that actually penned that letter and want that accountability, it's just been had for a few years, and we just not have gotten any answers whatsoever. I think it's really surprising that he would try to come to the study instead of actually try to come to us to explain like what is actually happening and what's going on. I'm supportive of like folks who are looking for accountability, but I want to clarify that this is part of FOBS, the seriously for the movement.
So Sherry, the thing is, and this is really, here's a thing for me, Sherry, that is fascinating and frustrating. There was so much discussion among Black Lives Matter activists. Well, no, we didn't want like the Urban League and the NAACP and like everybody else. We wanted decentralized, no one leader. We wanted collective decision making. I'll be honest with you, Sherry. Nothing can run that way. I'm just being perfectly honest. Part of the deal here, you cannot have a national entity having chapters if you don't have something, a document that holds them together. It's the Constitution, it's bylaws, it's operating procedures, it's hierarchy, it's structure. National CEO, boards, regional leaders, state leaders. And so I just really believe that at the end of the day, the reason we're at this point is because this idea of trying to create this decentralized, yet national, yet international infrastructure is just impossible to do unless you actually put real infrastructure and hierarchy in place. Your response?
I don't.
Sherry? Chanel, 1 second. Chanel, hold on. Chanel, hold on. Reverend, go ahead.
Yeah, Roland, I do not disagree with you as far as how organizations and the necessary structure for them to function. And I don't want it to seem that, especially, and I can speak for the Oklahoma City chapter and many of the BLM 10 that signed on to the letter, this was not an issue of being upset. This is calling for accountability and transparency because that is part of liberation work. We want to have a cohesive flow amongst all of us. And we don't want anyone excluded. When there's a chapter that is doing the work and they are working around police brutality, when they are serving mutual aid, that's part of the Black Lives Matter platform. And so it's not problematic at what they're trying to do, except for it has been exclusionary, except for there has been no communication with those of us on the front lines doing the work. And they've said that
and that's, and first of all, let me do this here.
Or invitation, but that has not occurred for everyone. And so it needs to be equitable.
Oh, so let's do this here. Chanel, I can barely hear you. Your sound is muffled. Control room, if y'all can make her audio only, that'll be great. If we can do audio only via Skype or FaceTime, that'll be much better because people even on YouTube and Facebook, they literally cannot hear you, and I can't understand. It sounds real muffled. So let's get that fixed. I want to bring in Robert and Scott here. Robert, you're part of Rainbow Push. You have chapters. You have hierarchy, your organization. I think what Black Lives Matter is going through those real-life growing pains on how do you harness something that no one expected would just take off the way it did. That's first. But two, Robert, let's be honest. This is also because millions of dollars have been coming in to Black Lives Matter, just like the NAACP has gotten millions of dollars of support after the death of George Floyd. What the difference is, you have infrastructure, national chapters, all these things put in place, and Black Lives Matter is trying to put all this stuff together. And the criticism, I think, of people is legitimate when they say, hey, you make yourself the leader, which goes to, well, how did you do that? Was there an election? Did a board choose you? Was there a vote of the membership? Do you even have membership? And then also part of is a branding deal. It's crazy to say that you have some chapters, that you have Black Lives Matter chapters that aren't a part of an entity which goes to the whole deal of the trademark. Guess what? The national entity can't say you can't use our name because they can't trademark the name. So it's to me, and I get they want to use Black Lives Matter, but at the end of the day, this is one of those things where I think folks may have to just simply pull back and say, let's shut this thing down. Let's completely have a clear organizational chart, and then we're bringing folks in to know what the hell is going on. So I get really all sides. It's just, Robert, confusing as hell.
Well, look, Roland, I think one of the best pieces of advice my Aunt Catherine gave me is that experience is the best education. Someone else's experience is the cheapest education. These are the regular growing pains of any organization. If you look back to the Big Six in the 1960s or the progeny of the Civil Rights Movement going back a century, you have many of these same issues and similar issues. If you look at any sorts of social justice organizations, and this is where intergenerational dialogue comes in, because if you are able to have conversations between a group like the Rainbow Push Coalition or SCLC, Georgia Coalition of the People's Agenda, NAACP, with some of these younger organizations, and then find out what they did as they grew. How do you create a structure? There was not always a situation where Rainbow Push had offices in Detroit, Chicago, Silicon Valley, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Baltimore. You have to learn how to build that organization. Being a revolutionary is easy. Governing is harder. So as we grow, as we continue to focus on the work and focus on the mission, you build the infrastructure around that to make it a long-lasting concept, a long-lasting idea that can build for generations to come and execute the plan, and not simply be a here today, gone tomorrow group. And also, when you don't have that organizational structure in place, you end up with a situation like Sir Major in Atlanta, who was representing himself as being part of Black Lives Matter, but was actually Black Lives Matter of Metro Atlanta or whatever organization he created, and then used thousands of dollars in donations to buy cars, to buy a house, those sorts of things. So these things come together over time. And I think instead of chastising, it's a situation where older and established organizations can work together with these groups. And of course, to anybody involved in these organizations, they can reach out to me at any time. I'd be glad to speak with them and find out the best ways to go forward, because as long as the mission is the focus, then you can work on developing the infrastructure around that. But it's all about dialogue between groups so you can figure out what other people did to build their organizations as strong. None of these things happen overnight.
You're a lawyer. You're used to organizations and lawsuits and all kind of stuff along those lines. Any lawyer will tell you, if this sucker ain't organized and you ain't got all your ducks lined up in a row, you're going to have dissension in the ranks.
Well, Roland, are you talking to me? It's A. Scott.
Yeah, go ahead. No, it's you, Scott.
Here's the difference between the Big Six when they were organized. They were organization. The Black Lives Matter movement started as a movement, if you will. And you're absolutely right. The movement, because there was so much work to be done around the country, that no one was thinking about organization, trademark, and what have you. And then the thousands, if not millions of dollars started rolling in. And now you have no trademark, and so you have these various independent entities operating, and that's what it's going to be. So either one or two things are going to happen. One, whoever has the most credibility and is best organized It's every man for himself. They're going to raise the money and assert themselves and present and be present and fight. All the other organizations are free to do the same thing right now. Secondly, if there's some organizing force or some presence or person that can bring all of these factions, all of these entities together and create an organization through acceptance and people signing off on exactly what the structure would be, because you're going to need structure because to have these chapters, if you will. I represent probably 7 or 8 Black nonprofits, and while they're organizations, excuse me, none of them started as a movement. And so this is the challenge. It's not just growing pains, it's organizing pains, if you will, and it's going to be up to the will of those who deeply believe in the movement, whether they're founders or not, to try to get one organization, accept leadership structure and the ability to lead. And that's what you're left with, or you're just going to have factions all around the country doing their thing.
I want to bring back Sherry and Chanel. I think we got Chanel's audio straight. Chanel, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, so Chanel, I can hear you. So Chanel, okay, what do you want to see done moving forward with this national entity, third group, or whatever? What do you want to see happen with Black Lives Matter?
That's what I was going to say earlier. I think sometimes people think decentralization means deorganization, and that's not true. We have plenty of organization. I mean, most of us have been managers of like large companies and stuff. That's not the problem. Our problem is the communication, the transparency that we've been asking for years. This didn't just start this year or last year. This started many years ago. And so as you name off other organizations who may have gone through the same thing or whatnot, we are not alone at asking for that transparency, but having that transparency actually be answered. So I think for the chapters, it's understanding what took place and then how did we get here? Because those are the questions that we're asking.
Sherry, Reverend Dickerson, isn't this also, first of all, I want to see what you want, but isn't this also a matter of the millions that have come in and chapters are going, wait a minute, we're the ones doing all the work. How is that money also funneling down to us? How's it being distributed to us? Sherry?
I think she's got mic issues.
Can you hear me now?
Sherry, please unmute.
I'm unmuted.
Now we can hear you.
Are
Go
you
ahead.
able to hear me? Okay. So I do
now
agree
we can hear you.
that we need, like we said, structure. What I want, the first thing that I would want is that the issues that we advocate against and try to get the systems dismantled, that we would be successful at that. So there would be no more issues to where people are dying by the violence of state-sanctioned violence and police brutality. Here in Oklahoma City, we are currently dealing with a situation where we've had 4 deaths within the last month. One just happened on Friday. A mentally ill man was murdered by Oklahoma City police. So what I want is for that to stop happening. With the organization, I want continuity. Yes, do we want shared resources? Do we want shared power? Do we want to have organizational structure where we are able to support one another and have support from the power hierarchy? Of course we do. It is difficult. The gentleman that spoke that said it's easy to be a revolutionary. I disagree with that. This is not an easy work. It is a heavy work. But with the revolution and being part of the movement, it does take finances to be able to ask people to literally step up and do this work, to stand on the front lines, to help us run administration, to have those voices amplified, to have someone have a social media presence, to be able to offer resources to the families that are dealing with the loss of a loved one. I mean, in the world of COVID, we want to be able to be the resource for our communities. That is what I want. That is why we are saying that we need just basically, it's not a part of the pie. If you are collecting, there are a lot of people who have donated under the misunderstanding that the money is distributed to the chapters where they are, and that's not happening. I want that to begin to happen.
Well, perfect example. I mean, that was this group that created some Black Lives Matter entity out of San Francisco that wasn't tied to the actual Black Lives Matter group. And I think a company gave, several $1 million, and they had to ask for the money back. I mean, to me, this is real basic. It's like, look, I'm vice president digital for the National Association of Black Journalists. If you want to support NABJ, you go to nabj.org. There's one entity. And I'll just be honest with both of you. This is the final comment here for me, Sherry and Chanel, and I want to get your final comments as well. If a guy like me is confused as hell, I can guarantee you there are millions of people out there confused. Folk don't know where to send money, who to send it to. When Donald Trump and Republicans were complaining about Black Lives Matter Minneapolis with this chant, pigs in a blanket, they said, that's Black Lives Matter. That chapter wasn't even affiliated with the national group. And so the difficult thing, look, I'm also an alpha. If you guys a bunch of guys running around saying, wearing black and gold and saying we're alphas, and they were not actually an alpha chapter, we shut that down. And so to me, this is just something where, again, from a national standpoint, and I keep hearing, when someone tells me we have structure, I'll be honest with you, when there are three entities bouncing around and you're not really know who's what and who's doing what, I think it's confusing. It's confusing to the public, not knowing if you're a chapter or you're not, or you're certified or you're not. What's the certification? Who chose leadership? To me, all of that goes together, Chanel, and I just think for the public, it's utterly confusing, and it would behoove Patrice and others to say, we have got to get this thing ironed out so we can have a path forward. Otherwise, people are going to lose confidence in Black Lives Matter, and that is the worst thing that can happen if it ends up going there, Chanel.
I think when people are actually invested into something, when they actually want to see that change, here we're talking about revolutionary chapters of people who take up Black liberation work. They know exactly where that work comes from. There's really not confusion about who does the work and who doesn't do the work. What I do find confusing is when I see a link on a popular branded website and I'm wondering where the money goes to. When we send the links out from our chapters or from our work, particular pieces of our work, whether it's housing Black mothers or feeding people out in the streets, they know exactly where that work is going to. So I don't want to make that confusion. What I do want to make confusion is when we're talking about transparency and accountability. That can happen anywhere. We got an entire president who isn't transparent and accountable to anybody. So I want to make sure that we're talking about the right things when we're talking about this situation. The tension is not within the organization. The tension is with the chapters who are producing the work, and an entity who is collecting resources, not only funds, but resources for that work. And those chapters, including the ones from the South or wherever they are, and people who used to be those chapters, have the right to be able to name that as we fight revolutionarily for freedom and to dismantle the systems, like Sherry said, that are killing Black people on the streets. They know exactly who those people are. Now, the problem we do have is people believe in the narratives that do come from the alt-right, the Republicans, or Trump's mouth. I'm not too concerned with them, but I think we do have a problem when we don't defeat that piece, right? I don't care what they're saying. What I do care is about what my people say and the work that my people see. And so that's where I'm more concerned about. All I'm asking for is transparency and communication, a call, an email, or something.
Sherry, final comment.
My final comment is that could we use a situation? I would love it if Ms. Collier's, and I have respect and I understand how organizations or a movement kind of just blossoms into something we weren't expected. I'm also affiliated with the Women's March, which we're dealing with some of the exact same growing pains. We would love to sit down at the table, be recognized for the work that we are doing, and get on the same page. They did ask us to have a fiscal sponsor, to get your boards together, and many of us complied with everything that they asked, and yet we have still had no communication. They have not acknowledged many of the chapters that are doing that work.
Well, so, look, we lost Reverend Sherry Dickerson. I appreciate her joining us. She is the co-founder of the Black Lives Matter in Oklahoma, and also Chanel Heim, Black Lives Matter, Louisville, Kentucky. I certainly appreciate both of you being with us. Folks, Robert, final comment here. Look, I appreciate what both of them want. I think, Robert, this also comes down to money. I think people, and look, when I had Patrice on, I want to know how much money has come in. You know, I know, look, the NAACP, when I had Derek Johnson on, look, they've had more than $70 million come their way in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd. Folks want to know, how's that money going to be spent? The same question people are asking, and guess what? There should be an accounting of that. They should be able to, Black Lives Matter, Patrice Cullors and her team should be able to issue a report stating how much money has been pledged to Black Lives Matter in the wake of George Floyd's death, how much money has been received, where is that money going? It is going into what area of grants? How many people are on staff? What are people getting paid? So when people talk about transparency, you're right. If you have chapters and you have a process, look, there should be a process there, meaning a chapter is notified 30 days or 60 days after. All those things. You have to put the infrastructure pieces in place before you can truly have an effective organization. Folks, a movement is not an organization. And that is the difference I think we're seeing right here, Robert.
Well, that was my point about being revolutionary is a lot easier than governing. You know, we all have had revolutionary ideas. When I was in college, I decided I was going to organize our campus workers at Clark Atlanta University, and I was going to do all these protests. And I almost got my ass expelled. Reverend Jackson's the one who saved me to make sure I was able to graduate, because having organizational support is very important. So instead of trying to out-revolutionary each other and out-revolutionary everybody, work on putting those infrastructural bedfast in place, and understand that there's nothing wrong with reaching out to other organizations. People who have been around for 40 and 50 years have been around for 40 and 50 years for a reason, because they understand taxes, because they understand payroll and OSHA regulations, and finding out how to build it into an actual movement instead of simply a revolutionary idea. So it's important to have those conversations, to reach out to people. You don't have to reinvent the entire wheel. And you talking about the millions of dollars these organizations are raising, give some of that money to Rainbow Push. Reverend Jackson asks me every day to raise money. Go to rainbowpush.org, join, get a membership, because there are organizations, there are legacy organizations that have been around, that are still doing the revolutionary work, and understand that there are plenty of fights for us all to have a different part in the fight. If we're fighting each other, that's another moment, another minute, another dollar that we're not spending on the work that needs to actually be done.
Folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have, you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Fact of the matter is, as I said, in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, we have seen a number of companies make changes. But I keep using the phrase, I'm not satisfied. I'm simply not satisfied with what they are doing. I want to talk now about the movement for Black Lives, because this is a part of this continuing conversation. Joining me right now is Patrisse Cullors. She's a co-founder of Black Lives Matter. Patrisse, so I want to talk about several different things, but I want to speak about still where we are. This is now 8 weeks later. This is now a moment where people are still, we're seeing these announcements. I saw the other day CVS announced $600 million racial equity decision. Today, George Soros announced $200 million being invested to deal with the whole issue of racial inequity. I've seen a $1 billion announcement from PNC Bank, and we've seen announcements from Apple and from Nike and Michael Jordan's company, and Adidas, and we could go on and on and on with what we're seeing. But I still keep saying I'm not satisfied, because I believe we have to be in a mindset of a third Reconstruction, that we have to be thinking about this in the same way as the first Reconstruction, which took place 12 years. Money was the one piece that was not dealt with. The second Reconstruction took place for 14 years. Money was the piece not dealt with. This being the third one, if you don't get to the money part, all you're doing or repeating what we did in the 1800s and then of course, in the mid-1900s. Can't hear Patrisse. Hold on one second. I think you might be on mute, or double check the audio.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Go right ahead.
Okay, great. I think that's exactly right. I think part of what you've heard from our movement loud and clear is that we must defund law enforcement. And what many people get caught up on is this idea of focusing on law enforcement. What we're really calling for is a reinvestment into Black communities. And what we've seen, large in part, is a divestment from Black communities for the last 30, 40 years. And what we've only seen investment in is policing and incarceration. So we launched the Breathe Act. And that act is a legislative policy platform that's really challenging all the ways in which we've seen elected officials not have the real conversation, which is, where are our resources actually going? And why aren't they going into Black people having adequate access to housing, public education, healthcare, and so many other resources that we so desperately need? We needed those when George Floyd was killed. We needed them when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, when Breonna Taylor was killed, and we need them right now.
Today is the 5th anniversary of the death of Sandra Bland. And the reality is, if you did not have that targeted policing, she would not have ever been placed in jail. She was targeted, she was tracked. That DPS trooper was waiting for that particular moment. And I think what people have to understand, you're absolutely right, we talk about defund the police. It's the amount of resources that are being poured into building jails and then funding police. And then it's always the boogeyman cry. Oh, no, if we do this here, violent crime is going to go up. When you actually look at the stats, the percentage of police, their involvement when it comes to violent crimes, is really under 10%. And the number is not that significant. Really what we're talking about here, let's just cut to the chase, the amount of money that we pour into police departments is to make white folks comfortable. When it comes to this whole issue, it is not about actually dealing with the problem of crime.
That's exactly right. I mean, you couldn't have said it any better. The role that police play is largely based off of myth. It's based off of what we see and on television, and based off what we've seen in movies, which is the police are the good guys. They're the ones that keep us safe. And what that really is code for is they keep white communities safe. They keep white property owners safe. And what we've seen, though, I think in the revealing over the last decade of using cell phone video to actually see what police officers do is large in part they are dealing with low-level crimes. They're dealing with issues of poverty, actually, issues that have been criminalized, poverty being criminalized. So they're dealing with homelessness. They're dealing with mental health crises. They're dealing with domestic violence issues. They're dealing with people who are drug and alcohol dependent. And we have to really question, why have we given the police that much authority over mostly Black and poor people's lives. And so that to me is the biggest challenge right now. And then what do? We're saying through the Breathe Act that we actually have to look at our dollars. Where do we put them? And we have to pull them out of the places that are toxic, that are not helping our communities, and put those dollars back into the communities that really do need it.
So let's just talk about that, the Breathe Act. Who are your co-sponsors? It was announced last week. We covered this on Thursday. Who are the co-sponsors of this bill, and is it going to pick up momentum and support in the House?
So we have two champions of the bill. We have Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, and we have Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. And we have been in conversations with the Congressional Black Caucus, and we have talked to several other Congress folks to just open up the dialogue about what the Breathe Act is really pushing for. The Breathe Act pushes for a divestment out of policing and military, and then it pushes for an investment into communities, Black communities in particular. And it's also looking at us having the conversation about HR 40, the reparations conversation. We want to lift that back up again. This is the time to take bold and courageous action in this moment. The streets, New York Times said it, Black Lives Matter is the largest protest movement the country has ever seen. This is the perfect time to make the kind of change that we need. We've also seen everyone at the local level, both at city, county, and state levels, making those changes. So we've seen school departments break ties with the police, saying, you know what, we don't need school police on our campuses any longer. We're seeing places like Seattle defund the police by 50% to put those dollars back into the community. Here in Los Angeles, our local Black Lives Matter chapter that pushed for a people's budget, forcing the city to actually decrease its dollars to LAPD, and also really pushing forward a new vision around how we deal with issues of homelessness and drug and alcohol dependency. So this is an opportunity, we believe, for Congress in particular to make bolder and direct asks.
So there are a lot of people out there who are absolutely confused when they hear the phrase Black Lives Matter. Yes. You have the movement for Black Lives, then you have this Black Lives Matter network. Okay, so can you explain to people, because what's also happening is you've got corporations out there who are giving money. I saw one story where there was some group out of the Bay Area that wasn't attached to nothing, and some corporation rescinded a several $1 million gift to them. So let's talk. What the hell is the movement for Black Lives and the Black Lives Matter network? What's official? What's not?
Sure. Well, you have to remember when we started the Black Lives Matter, Alicia, Opal, and I, and today is our 7-year anniversary. So when we started Black Lives Matter, it was a hashtag.
Right.
Alicia said a phrase, I turned it into a hashtag, and then we turned it into an online conversation platform dialogue.
Right, and it became a catchphrase for, out of all the stuff, Black Lives Matter. Got it.
Everything after this, it became Black Lives Matter, right? So that's just like what happened inside of mostly white media. They saw a lot of Black folks, they saw protesting, they're like, oh, this must be the Black Lives Matter movement. So we never named ourselves the Black Lives Matter movement. The media did that.
Right.
But it's important for people to understand that was after the acquittal of George Zimmerman. Right. So Black Lives Matter was in response to Trayvon Martin. Then 1 year later, lots of death happened between that, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But then 1 year later, we have the killing of Mike Brown, the murder of Mike Brown. That's when you see, an uprising happen in Ferguson, and that's what.
And right before that, remember we had Eric Garner, we had John Crawford III.
Renisha McBride.
Right, those literally happened about 4 weeks before. I mean, it was like all within the same time frame.
Yeah, Tamir Rice.
Yep.
All happened in the same time frame.
Right.
That's exactly right. So then Black Lives Matter, we actually become a global network in which we start to have chapters. And that's when, as I think as young organizers, we didn't realize that people would start making up their own chapters. So we had a set of chapters that we were in relationship to, and then there was chapters that would pop up, and we were like, "Oh, that's not us. Like they're not connected."
And so, and I remember, I think when everybody keeps talking, Republicans love bringing up the pigs in a blanket thing, that march in Minneapolis. I remember covering it. And
that was actually in St. Paul, and that was not our chapter.
Right, and people kept saying, "Oh, that's Black Lives Matter," and I kept going, mainstream media. Y'all need to understand, there are entities out. I said, this is not like the NAACP, where if you're an NAACP branch, you are actually a sanctioned branch of the national governing body. So so for everybody out there, there are Black Lives Matter chapters that are actually not a part of the movement for Black Lives.
So let me clarify.
Right,
so we have Black Lives Matter chapters that are official affiliates of the Black Lives Matter Global Network. But then there are people who created chapters that are not official to the Black Lives Matter Global Network.
Stop right there. Stop right there. Okay, hold up.
Yes.
So you said the Black Lives Matter Global Network. Is that separate from the movement for Black Lives?
So I'll explain the movement for Black Lives.
Okay.
So the movement for Black Lives is actually a coalition. It's a coalition of 150 Black-led organizations across the country.
Okay.
And Black Lives Matter is one of those organizations that is a part of the Movement for Black Lives Coalition.
Okay, so who's over the Movement for Black Lives Coalition? Like who's over that?
So there's a bunch of grassroots organizations. And the way that the Movement for Black Lives Coalition works is there's different pods. So there's different sort of there's like a policy table, there's an organizing and base building table. So they really work off of tables. And there's a decentralized movement leadership model, just like Black Lives Matter Global Network. Our generation is all about decentralized leadership. So there isn't sort of like one person in charge that is saying what's happening. It's really about a decentralized group of people who are all part of helping make that change and shifting that change. And then there's leaders that are co-leading the table, but they're not the final decision makers. We often work in a consensus-based model, so we have to all make the decision together. Sometimes we make rapid response decisions, and the group is willing to let the rest of the group make that decision. But we're trying to build is a different infrastructure than what you see in the mainstream, sort of corporation or even other nonprofits. We're trying to build decentralized leadership that is really about building from the ground up. And that's why it probably confuses people, because it's not a model that they've seen or that they can recognize. But that's what we're trying to do, is build out a new model of leadership and governance.
So who's over the Black Lives Global Network? Who runs that?
So the Black Lives Matter Global Network, I am one of the board members on the Black Lives Matter Global Network, but also the chapters are in deep relationship to the Black Lives Global Network. When we started it, we didn't see ourselves as a national organization. We actually identified as grassroots organizations, grassroots chapters working in their own locations. And so if you sort of were to take a microscope and to look into each city where the Black Lives Matter chapters are, you realize that they are supporting a lot of what's happening at the national level, but locally. So Los Angeles is doing their work, Chicago is doing their work, DC is doing their work, and they're all having a deep relationship to what's happening locally.
Right.
And those local issues often mirror what's happening across the country.
So, so money that's been given, how much do you guys raise, and how do you distribute that? I mean, are you funding things locally? Are you funding lobbying efforts? What what's, because
that's a good question.
Like what's actually happening?
So it's a C3. So let's be super, super clear. The Black Lives Matter Global Network is actually a C3, which means we are not a lobbying entity.
Well, no. When I say lobbying, you can lobby on issues. As a C3, you can endorse candidates, but you can, but you can lobby on issues.
You can lobby on issues up to a point.
Got it. Okay.
And you can't lobby on people, and you cannot give them money. So all that conversation around the Act Blue giving BLM giving to to the Democrats, that's just untrue. That's not even possible. As far as how the money gets distributed, it really does. Because we did raise lots of money. We didn't raise it. I mean, it was gifted to us.
Like what? 5 million, 8 million, 10 million, 20 million? What?
So we don't know the exact number just yet. But what we do know is that we are going to be regranting at least $12.5 million. And this feels important to us because we see ourselves as part of a movement-wide ecosystem in which those dollars don't just belong to the Black Lives Matter Global Network. We really see this as an opportunity to donate our dollars to our chapters, but also we're really interested in donating dollars to Black LGBTQ organizations.
So when you say regranting, so let's say in the aftermath of George Floyd's death, when we've seen these announcements, this corporation is giving money to Black Lives Matter. That's going to the Black Lives Matter Global Network.
Not all the time.
And that's why I'm asking the question, because, okay, so when you see that, is somebody calling them saying, yo, who the hell y'all giving the money to? I mean, because the fact that I'm asking all of these questions, I think this is part of the problem. So, because I keep hearing as well, folks are like, okay, we want to support Black Lives Matter, but who the hell do we talk to and who do we call and connect with to make sure it's going to the right group?
So some people know to get a hold of us, but the other thing, and this is a conversation that, we're trying to have with corporations, is you can't just make an announcement without having a conversation with the groups. Many of them, our lawyers have said, yes, they can technically, but it does create a lot of confusion if you just make an announcement saying we're giving to Black Lives Matter. There was a particular donor out in Texas who decided they're going to give lots of money to Black Lives Matter. I asked for the list, and what I saw was one of the groups was a Black Lives Matter group, but it was about 10 groups, and it was only one of them that was Black Lives Matter. So it's very deceiving when you say we're giving to Black Lives Matter, but now people understand, Black Lives Matter is an organization. There's also chapters. So who you're really giving to? That's very confusing. And that's something that we are having to deal with in the aftermath. Not all that money was donated to us. Some of it was donated to other groups. Some people, it was good for the corporation to make the public announcement, we're going to give to Black Lives Matter. Some of it, I personally had conversations and said, hey, can you actually give to other groups? You don't have to give to us. And so this is a conversation that we're having inside of our movement as well as, okay, this is the first time we've seen this kind of money. That's exciting. Dollars help us win things, but how do we do it in a way that's ethical, and how do we do it in a way that actually is responsive to the needs of our movement?
I'm bringing in my panel here, questions for them. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Avis Jones-Weaver. Your question for Patrisse Cullors.
Hi, thanks so much for coming on and explaining. I think that a lot of people have, I'm very sensitive to what you just mentioned about how a lot of people are giving, but they're not necessarily giving, it sounds like to me, possibly even to legitimate organizations, right? And I'm concerned that a lot of money that people who have the best intentions and want to support you think they're supporting you. But in some cases, I don't know, they could even be given to unscrupulous individuals and organizations. And so I'm wondering, what plans do you have about legal protections that you could put in place to guard your name such that it could not be utilized by unethical entities? Because right now people are just giving money, and it's a tragedy that some of that money, it sounds like, are going to places where it should not be going.
Sure. I mean, in the case of the Black Lives Matter Foundation that was incorporated in Santa Clarita and that a ton of corporations gave, I think, up to $4.5 million to, it's hard because when we started Black Lives Matter, you all have to remember, we didn't realize it was going to become a global phenomenon. So when we started to think about, protecting the organization, it was a little legally protecting it, right? Like making sure we have the name. It was a little bit too late because it became public domain. So we had to create new names like Black Lives Matter Network, Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, which is the technical name of our organization. And when we created those technical names, by that point, there were groups like the Black Lives Matter Foundation that had been created, and we did try to stop it. We went and tried to stop it, and we didn't win. We lost that fight. And so then we have a moment like this where tons of people are donating, and then they're donating to what they see is called the Black Lives Matter Foundation, and they don't know the difference. And that to me it's just challenging because it has a lot to do with just, it being an unfortunate moment where people are so excited about donating and then donating into the wrong organization. I am glad, though, that a lot of people are resending those dollars and they are getting in contact with the right people. But it takes time. We live in a moment of misinformation and disinformation. And there's been full-on social media campaigns that make people confused about what Black Lives Matter is. And people don't know who to listen to. So I think these kinds of conversations and Roland, I only would trust you to ask these kinds of questions. These are important because then you get to clarify what's actually happening and you get to go to the source.
Well, look, that's where it all started because I saw all these stories and I'm going, I said, okay, hold up, I'm confused. Now, if I'm confused, I know other folks are confused.
That's
and
exactly right.
And because again, as I kept seeing these announcements, and then I see, well, this group, and again, knowing, well, that's a chapter, but they're not really a chapter, but they call themselves a chapter. For folks who understand typical infrastructures in terms of how you support. Let's go to Eugene Craig with your question for Patrice Cullors.
Hey, I guess a quick question. Would you guys consider, publishing a list of the organizations that are directly affiliated with you guys, and then maybe even a broader list of organizations that probably could use funding, but may not necessarily be directly affiliated with you guys?
That's a great question. So all of our affiliates, like official affiliates, are on our website, blacklivesmatter.com. But we have done that internal memo around who people should fund. And I think that would not be a problem to share that publicly, where we've been telling people to go. A lot of us were doing that at the very beginning of the National Rebellion when people were coming to us, well, who should we donate to? And we had a list of folks, Minneapolis had a list of organizations of who people should donate to. So we would love to do something like that. I think that's super easy to do.
Mustafa.
Yeah, Patrice, thank you for everything you do. Every time I see you speak or I've read something that you've written, I always smile. Also, thank you for the Breathe Act, because you guys talk about environmental justice in there, and you take a holistic approach to building power inside of our communities. If there is a city or a town that wants to start a Black Lives Matter, I'm going to say chapter. I know it's not a chapter. How do they go through that process?
That's the right language.
Okay. All right. What do they do?
So sure. If you want to start a chapter, you could totally go onto our website and click on how to start a chapter. You all can imagine that lots of people have contacted us in this time. So we're asking people to be patient with us as we have so many folks who want to start chapters. What we also learned is that there's a lot of excitement to start a chapter, but there's a lot of work to building an infrastructure for a chapter. And, when we first started the global network, I wish I knew then what I know now of what it takes to build institutional infrastructure. So we also want to be mindful as we are working with people to develop their chapters, that we are moving intentionally, and that people, while they're excited, once you start a chapter and once you have that name, Black Lives Matter, it comes with a lot of weight and power. Also comes with a lot of baggage because there's a lot of right-wing people that are going after us. All of our chapters have experienced doxing. All of our chapter leaderships have experienced some form of harassment. And so we want to be really careful and intentional as we build that out. And we didn't have that carefulness and intentionality when we built it 7 years ago because we didn't know any better. But now we know better, and so we're moving slowly as we build out the infrastructure for chapters.
And on that point that you just made there, I remember when this was definitely in the aftermath of Trayvon Martin, And I'll never forget, that was like after the verdict. There were a group of us who we were involved in these phone calls. And I remember being on the phone call, and you had different organizations and different people, and it was all this energy. And then folks all of a sudden were rushing to, we could do this, and we can call the Bloomberg people and the gun campaign with this whole deal. And I was like, I'm sorry, I got a question. Who the hell are we? And what are we doing? And folks, and all of a sudden, you had some younger people on there who pissed off. They were like, well, why this old dude up here talking? And I'm like, let me be real clear. I said, we can all rush out and do some stuff. I said, but if you don't really know what the hell you're doing and who you're targeting, you're going to fail. And I remember telling one of the leaders, I said, I'm going to give this 3 more weeks. And she said, what? I said, these calls are going to last 3 more weeks, and then it's going to be over. I said, because this was about to happen. And so it was so funny that, and it did, it ended in 3 weeks. And she called me and she's like, damn, how in the hell did you know? I said, because the problem is really smart people don't also learn to study what happened before them. And the reason I say that, when I interviewed Dr. James Lawson, led the Nashville movement. Lawson said they spent 3 months discussing who they were. Then another 3 months discussing what they wanted to do. He said it was 6 months before they did anything. And there were a lot of people after the Trayvon deal, after Mike Brown, and I kept saying, y'all, you can piss on the NAACP and the Urban League and everybody all you want to. I said, there's a reason they're still here. Infrastructure matters. You have to create something that is able to harness the street power into actual policy. I said, without an entity, you can say decentralized, you can say centralized, whatever, but there has to be something that takes street action and then go, okay, but how do we maintain the policy piece every day? Now meaning organization, now meaning staff, how does it get funded? All those things. And I think a lot of people have learned some valuable lessons in the past 5 years, Patrice, about why infrastructure kind of matters.
That's exactly right. I think we did completely. I think we understood 7 years ago that we had a powerful moment and movement with many people who were just like us, mostly queer, mostly trans, Black, women. And we needed an infrastructure. We needed a container because no knocking the NAACP or Urban League, but they didn't speak for us. Those organizations didn't speak for us. And so we needed something new, something that looked like and felt like our generation. And so we are going through our growing pains, and I'm proud of them. I'm proud of us. 7 years later, we're still here, even though people said we wouldn't be. And we're still working it out. And we're still figuring out what our right size is and what our right role is. And I'm proud of the work that we've been able to do over the last 7 years.
Got to ask you this question because it has come up. We run some videos. We've broken this thing down. And that is, and this has come up a lot, and it needs to be asked because it needs to be answered. And I'm looking at a lot of the comments on Facebook, a lot of the comments that are on YouTube, and that is the folks who say this is being co-opted as a gay agenda. This is not a Black agenda. And again, I'm looking at what people are saying, and so how do you answer that to people who say, wait a minute, why is this a gay agenda and not a Black agenda? How do you answer those people who say that?
Well, I start with saying that there's no such thing as a gay agenda. And that Black people are queer and trans, we're bi, we're pan, we're all of the things, we're all of the LGBTQ plus rainbow. And we can't have a conversation about Black people without having a conversation about all the things that we are. And so this idea that there is a gay agenda, I think is a homophobic idea. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important that we are able to challenge when people say that and say that we have to fight for all Black people. We have to fight for all Black lives.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's it.
Oh no, I thought I heard this finger snapping. I thought you had cut off. I thought it had cut off, and so I was kind of like, no, you're still live. You're still live. Final question here. You laid out the Breathe Act. What is the, and the reason I'm saying lobbying, that it requires putting the pressure on people on Capitol Hill. It requires going door to door. And so what is your plan there to mobilize people to do that grunt work of having to go to all 435 House members, all 100 United States senators? Is there a plan of action where you're going to want people who are traveling to Capitol Hill, putting pressure on Democrats and Republicans to support this, to actually get the necessary 218 votes for it to pass?
Yes. I mean, I think it's important for people to know that the first day that we launched the Breathe Act legislation, we had 10,000 people sign up to be co-sponsors, civilian co-sponsors. And that's really powerful, almost unheard of, to have 10,000 people say, yes, we want this passed. So we're working with community members to meet their federal elected officials to have conversations about the Breathe Act. We're also transforming the Breathe Act into state and city and county legislation. So as much as it's a federal legislation, we also want it to mirror what's happening on the ground, and that feels really important to us as well. So you're going to see Breathe Acts be passed and by different governors in different states, and that's part of what we're doing as well to pressure the federal government. People need to remember when Dr. Martin Luther King was an organizer, while he was trying to get things passed at the federal level, he was doing all the work at the local level so that we could build that pressure up to the federal level.
And he was also working with existing entities who were in those communities as well. Because I think part of the problem is that when we talk about narrative, most people, even when they talk about SNCC, they don't quite understand that SNCC was an umbrella organization that was comprised of a number of local organizations in different cities and states. Huh?
Sounds like M4BL.
Right, and that was it. But so I'm always, because I think a lot of us, we romanticize the Black freedom movement without actually studying the infrastructure of the Black freedom movement, because the Nashville movement that James Lawson led, all of those SCLC workers, they actually came through him. So without Nashville movement, ain't nowhere to go to after that. And so it's reminding people that the local organizations absolutely matter, because the things that are done in Charlotte, in St. Louis, that are done, in Atlanta, and even when you start talking about in a city like Atlanta, it's also in this neighborhood and that neighborhood. It's not sort of this one overarching entity that's sort of in control of the entire thing.
That's exactly right. And that's like perfectly put. We don't understand movement infrastructure, and so people don't understand what movement looks like in real time. And in real time, it looks like a lot of years of work without a lot of victories, and then all of a sudden, we get into motion and respond to a moment, and then we see our victories. We're seeing tons of victories at the local level. Will it translate into a national victory? We'll see. We'll push for that. Will it translate in this moment? Maybe, hopefully, but we'll still be working, and that's the work of movement. You keep on fighting even if everybody else stops fighting.
I do have one last question, because I think this is important to discuss. That people criticize, quote, young folks today. The reality is there is a significant amount of training that goes on. Reverend Dr. Barber is going to be on with me later, and he when it came to the Poor People's Campaign, his whole deal is everything is about training, organizing, teaching, and then you have action. And so just share with the folks who may not quite understand the type of training, teaching, organizing that's going on, that they may not even see. They only see the end results when it's a march, when it's a protest, or when there's some sort of action.
Yes. I've been doing organizing work for 20-something years now, and I learned everything from being trained as an organizer. I did a training camp for organizers. I was a member of an organization. I spent a lot of time being invested in by other organizers. That's the work. As much as it is protesting, it's also being trained to be able to show up to your elected official's office and have a conversation, creating the petition, creating the flyer, creating the website to get your message heard. There's so much infrastructure training into one individual to be able to be an organizer, much like a doctor, much like a firefighter. This isn't a job that is sort of like, go ahead and do it and figure it out. Sometimes people end up doing it like that, but you can tell the difference between someone who's been trained in organizing and someone who hasn't. And I think we need to spend a lot more time training our organizers.
Absolutely. And also training them to also learn to take breaks. There are a lot of people the last 5 to 7 years who got burned out because it was actually a long-term commitment. Yeah. A lot of people went, damn, I didn't realize it was going to be this tough. And how are you also dealing with the mental aspect? Do you also have counselors and others? Because there are a lot of activists who are going through PTSD, who are going through depression, having to see these videos, having to talk to these families, and people are unprepared for that part of the work. That is the last question.
Yeah,
I sound like a Baptist preacher. I've had 4 closings, but that's the last question. Go ahead.
Yes, our movement deeply believes in healing justice, and our movement believes in the power of therapy, of Reiki, of acupuncture, of massage, of all the different modalities that are often inconsistent with the ways that we've been treated inside the medical industrial complex. So yes, there's a deep, deep desire to make sure that our movement feels healing justice, and that actually practicing healing justice. And it's hard. It's hard because we come from a long legacy of people who just work and work and work and work because we have to work and work too much. So it's hard to tell people take a break when you're witnessing your community and your loved ones dying or and such duress. But it's important and it's critical, and it should be inside of our movements, not sort of go away and take a break and then come back when you're ready. But our movement should be steeped in healing justice, and we really do try that.
All right. Patrisse Cullors, co-founder of Black Lives Matter Global Network, Movement for Black Lives. I think if anybody now has questions, they should just watch this video so now we have an understanding of what all the pieces are. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Greetings. I'm Tory Russell, Ferguson frontline organizer, and on the behalf of many activists in the St. Louis area, I'm joined with Mike Brown Sr., the father of Mike Brown Jr. Today, we hold Black Lives Matter accountable. The movement that is catapulted into the limelight has forgotten about Ferguson and the freedom fighters. Freedom fighters like King D. Seals, Edward Crawford, and Danye Jones have literally given their lives to the struggle, but are rarely spoken about and families are not taken care of. Brother Ali, Joshua Williams, and many other political prisoners from the Ferguson movement are incarcerated or have been and still has received no assistance from Black Lives Matter. What kind of movement are we building where we're saying Black Lives Matter, but the freedom fighters and the families are being left behind? Where is our restitution? Where is our organizing? Where is our building of a movement? We have groups like the Lost Voices and the Freedom Fighters here, and thousands of other youth activists in their 20s and 30s have been out in the streets protesting for months and months and years for years. Still forgotten. We're asking that Black Lives Matter leadership funds $20 million to Ferguson organizers, organizations, and community foundations to do the work. We're not begging for a handout. We're coming for what we deserve. Today, as we demand the $20 million to go to Ferguson as restorative measures so we can continue what we started, here's what we'll be organizing. Annual commemorations around Mike Brown Jr.'s life, mutual aid programs, Black Panther-style programs and services to meet the needs of the people, community gardens and forums, and also organizing fellowships and stipends so we can fight white supremacy full time. This is what we started in Ferguson, and this is what we will continue.
This request comes after the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation revealed it received more than $90 million in donations in 2020, mostly after the death of George Floyd. Now, of course, the movement gave national attention following the protests that took place with, in many ways, a level of energy after Mike Brown. But remember, you also had events taking place before that, where you had John Crawford III that took place in Beaver Creek, Ohio. You had, of course, Eric Garner in New York, previous deaths as well. This is the question that that has to be put out there, Greg. Black Lives Matter Foundation, they've come forward and announced they've got $90 million. How much has the NAACP gotten? How much has the National Urban League gotten? How much has other black organizations gotten? And now the question is, and this is real, if all of these groups, we had Derek on, and I've been told the NAACP has gotten in excess of $100 million. So the question now is, so if let's just say the NAACP got $100 million, and the Urban League got $100 million, and Black Lives Matter got $90 million. That's nearly $300 million that has come in after the death of George Floyd. The point they're raising is, which is a legitimate question, should the local organizations that sparked these protests that made the story go national, what are they owed?
Roland, you made a very good point the other day, brother, when you were engaging in the conversation about the nature of relationship between national organizations and local branches or local chapters. This isn't anything new. You made that point with NAACP, with the Urban League. The distinction between those formations and Black Lives Matter is that Black Lives Matter really started as a kind of social media phenomena that very quickly pulled into formation long distance runners, folk who had been involved in movement work, folk who were new to movement work, folk who came in to pose and take pictures and grift off movement work, and the epicenter of Ferguson. And as you said, I mean, we go back to 2014 with Trayvon Martin. The idea then, the impact of social media is now you have formations that didn't begin as formations. When they called the meeting at Cooper's Union in 1909 to form what became the NAACP, black people were in the minority. In fact, they kept Idabel Wells off of the league. And so what you've always had with the NAACP is a tension between local chapters and local branches, college chapters, and the national, which has been heavily influenced by corporate donations. And here's where I'm going with this. You see, liberation struggles are not subsidized. And if history has taught us anything, certainly in the previous iteration in the 60s with SNCC, with the Panthers, what you see is that the minute there are huge infusions of cash in clusters, and what was not released last week were the names of the big donors, you're seeing an attempt to influence the direction of a movement. This country is a corporation that uses politics as a shield. When Billie Holiday, in the first chapter of her memoir, Lady Sings the Blues, said, not the first chapter, it's one of the subsequent chapters, when she says, when it was the United States versus Billie Holiday, she said, I felt like it was the whole United States versus me. Sis, you're right. It is the United States versus black people. It is the police versus black people. It is state violence. So while they give you some money to try to generate some data and build a network, meanwhile, the killings keep going. Meanwhile, the state is surveilling you. Meanwhile, you have to worry about where you're going to lay your head at night. So redistributing this money in any way that could actually lead to liberation work might mean the money dries up, as SNCC. And that is the devil's balance that this new formation that's trying to build itself at the same time as trying to fight is trying to strike. So this isn't anything new at all. If people are trying to pay for your liberation, you in trouble. You need to crowdsource it.
The demand is quite interesting, Kelly, because there were a lot of people who fundraised off of Ferguson. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of individuals who, off of Ferguson, have gotten book deals, podcasting deals, speaking deals, have flown all around the world, been the guest of folks in Hollywood and Oscar parties and all sorts of stuff. But I go back to, what do we do about the entities, the people who are still there, who are still on the ground, who are still fighting for change in Ferguson? We were there in St. Louis. You had Tashara Jones, who just took first place in the mayoral election. You got the runoff taking place on April 6th. You have Wesley Bell, who was elected DA there, Kim Gardner, and those black folks are catching hell. Trust me, St. Louis is about to, the white folks in St. Louis is about to really go crazy if you're going to have a black mayor, a black city DA, a black county DA, all of them at the same time. Oh, yeah, it's about to be some problems. So what do national organizations owe local organizers?
I feel like they owe them everything, especially when it comes to Black Lives Matter. I can't speak on NAACP. I can't speak on the National Urban League because, frankly, the structure of each of those organizations are something in which actually feels like a corporation. So any monies that go into those organizations, it actually is understandable why they have that influx of cash. Because
no. But remember, the money came in, Kelly, after George Floyd's death. So so companies were trying to park it somewhere. But the question still, even for the NAACP, Urban League, or any other national group, what do they owe the local people? What do they owe the local organizers in Minneapolis? What do they owe them in Ferguson? What do they owe them in Louisville with Breonna Taylor?
I understand that. That's what I was getting to. So when it comes to National Urban League and NAACP, it is a true organization. So what I'm saying by that, I mean, they have lawyers on deck to actually try these cases that come through regarding police brutality, regarding race discrimination and the like. They have a team. When it comes to National Urban League, I see the monies in the that go out. At least I live in DC, so I see where that money is going when it comes to National Urban League. I can't tell you exactly where the benefit is coming from regarding Black Lives Matter money. I do not see Black Lives Matter things or initiatives happening in my community. I don't see them happening in the Baltimore community, which is where I was born and my family still live. I don't see Black Lives Matter anywhere, but I do see the NAACP, but I do see National Urban League. So when it comes to the 90 million that got to Black Lives Matter, where exactly did it go? Because if you don't have an answer for that, then the conclusion that I have to come to, frankly, is that those monies, when you do find them, it needs to go to those families. There should be no reason why Michael Brown's family is in the predicament that they're in, scraping for funds to commemorate their son. Because there would be no Black Lives Matter without Michael Brown. There would be no Black Lives Matter without Freddie Gray or Trayvon Martin or anybody that has come since the movement started. So the fact that that Black Lives Matter is in this predicament, frankly, I saw it as a long time coming. I did not think it was nearly as much as $90 million, but I was wondering what they were doing with this money because the local chapters don't have it. The regional chapters don't have it if they have a regional chapter. So National Black Lives Matter movement, I don't even know who the head is, really. I know who founded it. When I go online, I see what their policy is, what their initiatives are. But
we've had Patrice. Well, first of all, we've had Patrice Cullors on the show, who is the leader of the Global Network, who to explain all of that. But the point that you're raising, Reese, I've heard some NAACP chapters say we ain't seeing the money. So I mean, again, let's just be real. I'm talking about, and I've been on the ground. I've been on the ground in multiple states where I've heard folks say, "Hey, National isn't kicking that money back." I've already heard folks even raising the question, all right, all this money came in. The bottom line is this here. And when I talk about the money, I look at the money from two perspectives. Not just how much money came in. But Reese, I want to know what race equity indexes, scorecards are being established by these entities. So here's what I mean. If you're Black Lives Matter Global Network, the foundation, and money's coming in, and if you're the NAACP and money's coming in, and you're the National Urban League and money's coming in, and you're the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and Lawyers Committee and money's coming in, I want to know, are those organizations looking at the check and saying, okay, you're donating $1 million. I need to see the blacks on your board of directors. I need to see who are your Black senior officers. I need to see what is your supplier development with Black businesses. I need to see, are you investing money in Black banks? I need to see, are you also spending money on Black media? I need to see, are you using Black law firms? I need to see, are you using Black bond companies? I need to see, are you using Black advertising agencies? See, if you start asking those questions, that $1 million they gave could be paltry compared to the monies that Black entities could be receiving by virtue of doing business with the company. I don't know if those questions are being asked and demanded before the checks are being deposited.
That's a good point, Roland. I think, one of the issues that we have is that we go by what's most popular, and it's easier to write a check to a big name, and I have great respect for the NAACP, particularly the Legal Defense Fund, which does amazing work, and the Urban League, and even the Black Lives Matter movement. But I think what the issue is that all this money flows through them, and so they're the middleman, or they're cash hoarders. I can't speak on the positions of NAACP and Urban League, but specifically with Black Lives Matter, they have $60 million cash on hand out of the $90 million. So the money is still there, but essentially they don't have the protocols in place. They don't have the criteria in place to really distribute that money in a timely manner. And maybe perhaps they're concerned about it drying up and they don't want to make promises and things of that nature. But the bottom line is that I make this point about, validating black outlets, Black creators, Black businesses, is that we have to sometimes ourselves think beyond the big names and actually look at what's happening in our local communities. And sometimes we have a mistrust of our local community organizations, because we feel like if they're not big enough, then they're not credible, or that they're not doing the work. And we want to see, an organization that has image awards and has, galas and has all these other things that make us feel like, oh, they're legitimate and they're major. And so I think that one of the things that we can do as individuals who want to see change is actually funnel our own money into these local organizations. It's not going to make headlines, not going to make national headlines, but it can actually impact your community. And what the NAACP, the Black Lives Matter movement, all these other places can do is actually vet these organizations. The NAACP has an extensive number of chapters, far more than Black Lives Matter does, but actually funnel that money to local organizations. It's the same thing that we saw during the 2020 election, where local voting rights, civil voting activists and community organizations were galvanizing people, and we saw the results of that in Georgia. And so I think that we have to shift the way that we look at philanthropy, shift the way that we look at activism, shift the way that we look at how our money is being spent, and actually do the research ourselves instead of just writing a check to a big name organization. Or in some cases, people create their own organizations that have high overhead, that don't, like you said, don't recycle Black dollars, and nothing is getting solved. $300 million can go a long way, but if you're only funneling that money to the big name organizations and the food bank down the street, or the people who take, that provide, relief to people in their community, they get asked out, like Michael Brown is saying. I don't know where $20 million comes from, but to their point, the local people, the people that are doing the work, if they get shut out, that's a problem. So if you can't spend the money, then get the money to the organizations that can. The last thing I'll say is this is something that they did, particularly with the immigration aspect, when there was the child separation that was happening, where you had the immigrant activist organizations where they said, okay, we have too much money. These are other organizations that you should be sending the money to at this point. And so sometimes organizations have to say, hey, time out. You know, don't just donate to us, donate to these organizations. If it's a Minneapolis thing, go talk to the Minneapolis Bail Fund or whatever the situation may be, and try to not necessarily hoard all the money themselves.
This is also for people who don't even understand, who have no understanding of history. Greg, this is not new. The reality is Ella Baker was a huge critic of national entities coming into cities, sucking up the media attention, coming in, raising money, and then taking that money out. Dr. King was very cognizant of that. April 3rd, 1968, at that speech at Mason Temple, the mountaintop speech, he talked about the SCLC opening a bank account with a black bank there in Memphis. Folks were being very deliberate with that. What I hear from Michael Brown's dad and this organization is we are here doing the work. We are starving in order to mobilize and organize our people to actually affect change, yet all of y'all others came in and raised money off of us, and none of that money ever came back to our community.
Right. Well, Roland, you're right. I mean, I'm glad you raised the name of Ella Baker in that regard. You know, it's funny. I was just reading a book, small book that was published by the congregation at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Dr. King, in that call, you know, he has direct experience with that. During the Montgomery bus boycott, as they were raising money literally from pennies to dollars from black communities and others all over the country, every time they would get money in Montgomery, they distributed that money across 10 black banks in the country. That allowed them to buy a fleet of cars. That allowed them to pay for repairs for those cars. That allowed them to pay for fines as the Montgomery police tried to put them out of business by fining the taxis for not paying the fare or whatever. In other words, it was, and Reese's point is the point we really have to really consider, I think, and you're making the same point. When each gives a little from what we have, we don't have to do a lot. No individual has to do a whole lot. That is the philosophy if you're talking about a liberation struggle. We live in a capitalist society. The tiny black elite, the tiny black upper class has benefited from the black movements that have taken place in this country. But in a capitalist structure, it is created in a way to engender this aspiration to become a member of that tiny group, not realizing that there's a cap on the number of people that can be in that class in a capitalist system. So when you're dealing with the poor, when you're dealing with folks out on the streets of Ferguson, these corporations, these big donors are giving money, but the money will then go to reinforce the structure of civil and human rights work, the template for which is set by the political economy of the country. So then what you're going to see is these emerging institutions will look like the legacy institutions. They'll have directors, they'll have secretaries, they'll have offices, they'll be paying rent in buildings they don't own, they'll be flying in car and staying in hotels they don't own. And in other words, and they'll be pushing for policy, incremental policy change. And if they do go out and hire black folk, if these corporations hire, it'll be individuals. It's the same kind of model that creates the slim, well, not slim possibility. What Randall Robinson critiqued in his memoir when he was talking about the late Vernon Jordan, our new ancestor, he called it Vernon Jordan syndrome. Because remember, Vernon Jordan left the Urban League and went into private practice and said famously, I ain't no civil rights leader. In other words, when you have individuals make advancement as a result of group movement, you're not going to see in the society those who are at the top, because that ain't the black middle class, who are hanging on this precarious perch by their fingernails. You're going to see those at the top, they're going to invest in keeping that system going. They may let a few Negroes in, but them people on the streets of Ferguson, hell no. That's why the police attacked them. The only choice, well, I won't say the only choice, the best strategy we have, as Reese just said, every one of us needs to do and follow the model that you're building here with Roland Martin Unfiltered. Everybody put something on it. And if anything comes from other places on top of that, let's work so that that's gravy. Because see, the minute they do that, as the great Lauryn Hill once said, funny how money change a situation. They're investing. They're not donating. Reese's right. We got to rethink this notion of philanthropy.
See and I'm going back to this notion of the race index, because what it does is it forces the true change in these companies, and it doesn't give them the out when they come with a few dollars. And that's, to me, and again, that's how the thinking has to be different. Because what we have to realize is that when an individual or an entity, a corporation, decides to make that donation, they're doing it for a reason. There are those who are doing it for the purpose of generating positive attention. There are those who are doing it to be able to say they're associated with someone. But we have to not be as so desperate for the check to go, hold up 1 second. Let's have a broader conversation about your company and what it is that you're doing. See, we were discussing the other day Walter Geer's criticism with regards to Ad Color and them hiring a company with Drago. I got an email from them, from the folks with them, and they said that no, they didn't hire them. He had his facts wrong. That wasn't the case. But I asked the same question when organizations hand out diversity awards. And we're living right now in a time where everything is DEI, 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 diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. And I go, well, who's actually benefiting other than the DEI person y'all hired? That's right. See, I think our demands have to be far deeper and bring a much different level of accountability. I go back to, and y'all keep hearing me talk about it, I go back to Operation Breadbasket. They did not, starting with Reverend Leon Sullivan in Philadelphia, going to SCLC, moving to Chicago, they didn't go to companies and say, hire black people. They didn't go to companies and say, well, donate to our cause. No, they approached them in a vertical and a horizontal way. They said, we want to see people here, 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 here. Money going here, here, here. To me, the power of organization is when a company comes with a check and you say, thanks for the check, but let's talk about some other stuff. Said company, what partnership do you have in any way with your nearest HBCU?
Good question.
If there's no HBCU that's in your city or in your state, okay, what partnerships do you have with your predominantly black high schools to drive folks to 2-year, 4-year institutions? See, this is where, to me, organizations have got to be far more intentional and deliberate in making demands and not be short-sighted in this is what they gave to us, because, to Reese's point and to Greg's point about us giving back, if the power of the organization drives value to the black law firm, the black accounting firm, the black engineering firm, the black architecture firm, the black bond company, the black ad agencies, black-owned media, and all the black, you now are creating not $1 million check, but you're now creating 5, 8, 10, 20, 30, 50 million dollars in business. And so now those very black institutions can in turn give a check to the NAACP, give a check to the National Urban League, which then makes it where you don't have to depend on the corporate support. You're depending on your people funding you, so you have the freedom to make those very demands.
That's right.
And that makes perfect sense. But at the same time, that is a very forward thinking in the future perspective.
No, it's not. It's right now. It's not in the future.
For BLM, it is in the future, because right now they have $90 million and they're not giving it to people who are on the ground.
No. It's not forward. It's right now. While we were having this conversation, Kelly, I literally sent a text to one of the Black Lives Matter people. And I specifically said, hey, is BLM establishing a race equity index for those corporations giving them money? The response was, let me check. Not that I know of. After this show, I'm going to be on the phone with them. See, I'm not waiting for the future. What I'm saying right now, I'm going to send the very same text to Derek Johnson of the NAACP and to Mark Muriel of the National Urban League, because this is the moment for us to properly leverage the power. So it shouldn't be. So I'm not saying, and what I'm talking about is not even just national. The same thing goes for the individual chapters. You mentioned it. These regional NAACP chapters, these state branches, local chapters, same thing. What I'm saying is this should be modus operandi for any black institution. If you're trying to come to us and latch on to us to be able to say, I stand with the Freemasons, I stand with Eastern Star, I stand with the Alphas, do you have a race index that is 360 degrees supporting of black? If not, you can't stand with us.
And that makes perfect sense. And I agree with you. But even though you just sent that text message out right now, that is not the case. That's what I mean by in the future. It will happen, but right now it's not.
Right.
So right now they have $90 million, and right now Michael Ferguson's family is asking for $20 million, because the $90 million that BLM has is due in part because of the work that the Ferguson family put in on the ground when their son died. It is due in part to the people who were killed by police after Michael Ferguson. I'm not talking about police brutality. I'm talking about the people found in their cars burnt up down in Ferguson, Missouri. It's due in part to those things. So right now, I would say that they need this $20 million. Right now, I would say whatever's going on with BLM, until they get that race index that you talked about, which they absolutely need, they need to give the money that they have right now to these local chapters, to the family of Michael Ferguson, to the family of Michael Brown, to the family of George Floyd and Trayvon Martin and the like. Because it appears to me right now that those families, that those organizations associated with those families are actually doing more work on the ground than BLM and their $90 million.
Well, I think it's important, as you say, Kelly, I mean, okay, one thing is the network doesn't have the infrastructure. So part of it is building the infrastructure. And that was, for example, one of the key...
Actually building that on the fly. They're literally building it on the fly.
No question about it, which was one of the great values of having an Ella Jo Baker, who had deep experience with these civil rights organizations, stand between the NAACP, between Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the young people of SNCC to help them see how to do that. Now, if you look, for example, at Black Futures Lab, at Alicia Garza, who's not in the BLM formation now. That type of research-based driven model is there, but the challenge is, and I think, Kelly, you hit it right on the head. If they want, and I've been listening to, I know some of the people on Black Lives Matter DC, BLM Philly, some of the places saying, we're not getting this money. One of the excuses that has been offered is, well, if you all don't have bank accounts, if you don't have the infrastructure, then we can't do the transfers. We've got these grants of up to $500,000 or $50,000. But here's the problem. The movement is not based on an infrastructure like that.
No, it's not.
these young people out here at BLM DC who are taking on gentrification, who are out here putting themselves in harm's way, who are really interacting with and dealing with, there are people who are going to be who are food insecure and housing insecure. They haven't set up a place for the transfer, and that really speaks to the fundamental problem we have here. See, Roland, what you're talking about is developing a model that has existed in previous generations, but it was more, this was the genius in some ways of Whitney Young, which is what made his loss so tragic in the Urban League formation. Whitney Young would ask those kind of questions, but he wasn't a civil rights leader in the mold of a Dorothy Height, who had an independent base with the black women. He wasn't in the same model as Stuart Carmichael or John Lewis and the SNCC formations, James Foreman and them. He was part of that, but his job was to ask those kind of questions, which leads me finally to the question, how is BLM, how are any of our organizations operate? I know there's a Leadership Council of Civil Rights. I know there are formations that come together, but how are these organizations interfacing with each other so that everybody doesn't have to play every role and we can advance together?
That's a very good point.
I don't know that we'll ever get over the class tensions that some kind of coalition like that would unearth, because quite frankly, since the end of legal segregation, the common objective has fractured.
Reese, go ahead.
Yeah, so many excellent points. I think that there's a two-pronged thing. They're not mutually exclusive. I think what Roland is talking about, the racial equity index, is you give me a check and I don't just say thank you, I hold you accountable. And that's the opening part of a conversation. It's not the end part of the conversation. So I think there's that aspect. And then there's the aspect of, okay, once you get that check, what are you doing with it? And that's where the infrastructure comes in. And I think that, to Dr. Carr's point about that class tension, it's just my perception, but a lot of times when you have the movement, right, you have the activists, you have the people who really are every day putting their life on the line, and there seems to be sometimes, my perception again, there's this adversarialness between, like a corporate person. To Roland's point, you got to have an accountant, you have to have lawyers, you have to have people that have the skills to implement that infrastructure. And so many times there's this purity test where it seems like we're on opposite ends, instead of looking at, well, listen, maybe I don't have all of the talking points, maybe I don't have the rah-rah, get out on the street, put my body on the line spirit that you do, but I do have the knowledge and skills to make this infrastructure work so that you can actually implement these goals and be impactful and find a way and find a manner in which you can distribute to the community. And so part of the things that has to happen is we have to resolve that class tension. We have to resolve these litmus tests, these purity tests that alienate people who actually can help in their own way. And so everybody's not going to be an activist. I hate when people call me activist because I'm like, I think that's an overstatement. I don't think that I deserve that title, but I have a lot of skills. I'm a financial manager. I have a lot of things that I can contribute to the situation as well. So that's where we have to find a role for everybody within these organizations and stop having this adversarial approach towards each other. We have to use, when you have the organization, Black people who have the skills in each of those roles, and let everybody play their position. And I think that's a big part of the problem too, is that, to your point again, Dr. Carr, people are trying to play every position in the role, and you can't physically do it. And so to what Kelly is saying, you don't have the infrastructure. You need the infrastructure, because then you got to figure out a way to explain $90 million to people. Or,
well, my thing is, if you don't have the but my biggest problem is, if you don't have the infrastructure, why are you accepting $90 million?
So let me unpack that. Because I do think, I think we got to understand what's going on here. And that is this here. What Black Lives Matter is doing right now, folks, is no different from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. What Black Lives Matter is doing right now is no different from the Progressive National Baptist Convention. When Dr. King and others were in the National Baptist Convention USA, there was a scuffle on the podium. King wasn't there.
That's right.
Where a preacher was knocked down, fell off the podium, hit his head, and he died.
Yes.
They were kicked out of the National Baptist Convention USA. and they went and established what is now the PNBC, the Progressive National Baptist Convention. What did that mean? That meant they needed an office. They needed a phone line. They needed lights turned on. They needed a bank account. They needed corporate papers. They had to literally create an entity on the fly in the midst of activism.
But dear brother, where was the money coming from?
But
no,
and that's my point.
No, wait, hold on. I'm not done yet.
Okay, my bad.
Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Same thing. SCLC's money came from labor unions, Walter Reuther, and others, but also the donations of black people.
Right.
Now, here's the fundamental issue that, again, I understand the criticism of BLM, but I also understand BLM. BLM did not start as an organization.
Right.
It started as a hashtag.
Yes, sir.
It did.
They tried to even, because Black Lives Matter was already in the public domain, they couldn't trademark it.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually, and then what happened was you had people who quickly embraced Black Lives Matter, the phrase, because it was a perfect, all-encompassing phrase. Then it was like, well, damn, people are asking us to do stuff, do this, do that. Now we have to create something to meet the demand of the very people, because the people were saying, no. We ain't trying to align with the NAACP, the Urban League, National Action Network, Rainbow Push. We want something separate. So what they did was do actually something that you never do. You don't create a national entity after branches were already established. Normally, it's branches, state, region, national. BLM is actually
the inverse.
Actually, ain't even the inverse. It's branches, national, some branches tied to them,
right?
Some not. So you have BLM branches that are actually not even affiliated with the national, because imagine having NAACP chapters that are literally called NAACP chapters, not with NAACP. So you now are, from a branding standpoint, you now dealing with people saying, BLM's did this. And they like, that ain't us. But because they have the name BLM, it's all encompassing. So you're dealing with people who are not, so you're trying to like, how can I catch up? So I'm gonna give the BLM organizers some leeway in trying to construct, because let me also say this here. There were a lot of black activists, young black activists, who shitted on the NAACP and the Urban League, them old-ass groups. And you know what happened after Trayvon Martin? You know what happened after the protest when Obama was there? The same people who like, we got leaderless organizations. They realized the value of infrastructure.
And that's my point.
And so now they're scrambling. Now it's like they're trying to catch up, and it is absolutely hard to try to build a building and work in the same building when you're trying to build it. It's damn near impossible. And so that's the struggle that's going on. So that's why when Patrice Cullors was on, and when she was trying to, and I was like, okay, I'm trying to understand what's the foundation, what's the global network, what's this? And I was sitting like, okay, Patrice, I really don't know what the hell you're talking about, because they are trying to literally create an infrastructure with a runaway train, and that's hard as hell. Y'all go ahead.
Yeah.
And I completely understand that, and I am all for giving Black Lives Matter's grip, because, like you said, it is a daunting task, a seemingly impossible task. But my point is, not only is it possible, it actually needs to be done. And frankly, how much grace are we going to give BLM? Because it's been at least 4 years.
Actually, it hasn't.
90 million.
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. It hasn't. The problem that they've been having is they have been this, it hasn't been how you truly start an organization. And so
I understand that.
And so here's the deal.
I understand that point.
Here's the deal. First of all, I'm not in the organization, so I don't have to get. I don't have a dog in the hunt. What I do,
and I get that too.
What I do see happening is they are grappling with how do you harness this thing, create hierarchy. Because this is one of the problems. And Greg, because all these books you got behind you, I want you to speak to this. I don't care what you say. Y'all can go with that leaderless stuff all y'all want to. You can't show me any organization that doesn't have hierarchy. And their struggle, in my opinion, has been because they want to make group decisions. You can't make group decisions. You gotta have people in charge of fundraising, membership, public policy, boards. You gotta have leadership. And they're trying to do this thing leaderless, and that's a little hard, and they've learned that. So what happened? When Patrice made herself head of the organization, people were like, what are you doing? Why'd you do that? Because somebody had to be the leader. So I see what's going on, and I see why people are frustrated, but this is just pure, y'all, organization building. It's the growing pains, and guess what? No black organization has ever had $90 million from at the outset, and now you're trying to figure out what the hell do we even do? That's what's going on here, and I get it. Greg, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's a problem, Roland. You're right. What you just described. I mean, you know, when you mentioned the Baptist Convention and the Progressive National Baptist, it's funny, man, because I went down a rabbit hole the other night. I started reading a collection of essays by Lewis Clayton Jones, who's a lawyer, very important civil rights figure. But his brother was William Augustus Jones, who, as you know, followed King out and was one of the founders of the Progressive National Baptists, and it was the pastor of Bethany Baptist Church in New York. And I raised that because, you know, as many times as I, as a 15-year-old with my grass cutting money, gave up 10% when the man got up in the pulpit and asked, will a man rob God? We understand that even with the split, they had a steady source of income from the churches where people paid their tithes. Now, why is that important? Individuals don't beat institutions. So when you're trying to build an institution around a concept or an idea or a feeling or a protest or a general strike against a social order, unlike the black church, which was the foundation for so much of what we've been able to push forward, and I'm not saying the black church exclusively, because what you mentioned, for example, in terms of faith-based organizations, for example, you see a fracturing among the Muslims. Remember when Father Allah or Clarence 13X leaves, and then you have the Nations of Gods and Earths came out of the Nation of Islam. You got Silas Muhammad. They still selling Muhammad Speaks because they have the right to have that because they were able to trademark it. And the Nation of Islam has the final call because they can't even use the name after Elijah Muhammad died in 75, so on and so on. But if you say Muslims, black, even the Sunni or Shia Muslims, people think you're talking about the Nation of Islam.
No. Hold. I need you to go back right there. Because I think some people just missed what you said. When the Nation of Islam, when Elijah Muhammad dies,
yes,
and his sons take them into a mainstream Islamic organization.
That's right.
When Farrakhan says, I want to rebuild the nation, he couldn't just do it. There were things he could not say and do.
Legally, that's right. That's why they have to sell the final call. That's why it's not called Muhammad Speaks. He didn't own the. In fact, what do they call it in the nation, Roland? What do they call it? The second, the resurrection, or I get the phrase they use. Anyway, I'm saying all this to say the point you're making is very critical. If you're trying to build an organization around a concept, but you have no pre-existing infrastructure, that's a setup to begin with, and you almost got to do it very incrementally, as you said, from the grassroots up. But then here come these people who have an investment. What's their investment? They want the social order to continue, and they want to have it as smooth as possible. They come in and write you a big ass check. That could be a recipe for chaos now.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So anyway, I'll stop there, because what you're really doing, Roland, is trying to help people think through how they can do something that literally hasn't been done before, not to my knowledge, in this country.
And Kelly, that's why the difference between BLM and Color of Change is Color of Change doesn't accept any corporate donations, but they also were structured from the beginning like an organization. So when they grew, you didn't have all this drama. Go ahead.
No, I completely agree with the points being made right now. I don't want to come off as if I disagree with you, Roland, or anybody.
No one's disagreeing. We're just walking through a set of facts, because a lot of people really have no idea what the hell we're talking about. There are a lot of people out there who just say stuff, who don't even understand how it started, how it's constructed. They don't even realize that there were 3 founders of Black Lives Matter, and 2 of them are not with the group. Alicia Garza has a separate organization. Oprah is not there. Patrisse Cullors is only the last of the 3 original who's actually leading the organization. Most folks don't even understand that. Alicia Garza still gets jammed up about Black Lives Matter. She's like, y'all, I'm not with the organization. Go ahead.
And I get that. I'm just going back to the point of the Ferguson and the Brown family wants $20 million from BLM because they have not seen basically the fruits of their labor since 2014. And when you go on blacklivesmatter.com, their about page is centered on Ferguson, Missouri, and Michael Brown. So the fact that the Brown family has not received anything of significant weight from this movement, from this now foundation, I don't care how long or short it has been since the formation of it, they now have $90 million because of this family, because of the boots on the ground people in Ferguson, Missouri.
But that's not true.
They are struggling right now is
that's not true. The $90 million is because George Floyd got killed.
Oh.
The bulk of the money, Kelly, is not true. That's what I'm trying to. The point I'm trying to make, and this is the struggle. This is the struggle, and I totally get Mike Brown, because here's the piece. When Mike Brown lays out, Ferguson and Mike Brown's killing took the movement to another level. But do you ignore John Crawford III? Do you ignore that activism? Do you ignore the activism around Eric Garner, which happened a month before Michael Brown? So,
of course not.
So, but the bulk of the money came in because of the death of George Floyd. So the question, which I threw out originally, was, okay, do you give the money to Mike Brown, $20 million in Ferguson, when really the money is because of what happened with George Floyd? And so the overarching question is, for all these black organizations, if all of this money has come in since the death of George Floyd, what responsibility do they have to give to the local groups? And that's how I started this whole deal. But the money didn't come in because of Mike Brown. Some may have come at that particular point, and there was money that was raised then. But the bulk of the 90 is because of George Floyd.
Interesting.
So what do we do now?
It happened in the past year. I think that the thing about it is, like with the Ferguson argument, I get the argument that, hey, we've been on the front lines and we are activists and we have, had our blood, sweat, and tears on this. That's almost like a reparations type of argument in terms of like a restorative justice. Hey, give us a piece of the pie. I think if you say like what they're saying, but they're not saying that per se. They're also saying that, well, we're going to do all these things with the money. Okay, well then how do Michael Brown's organization, spend $20 million? Because Black Lives Matter hasn't been able to spend $90 million. They still have $60 million left over. $30 million they've given away to various causes, local chapters, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is not just a matter of who deserves what, but it's what are you going to do with the money? And that's what my original point was, is instead of always looking at the national, the big name organizations, we can make that decision ourselves to donate to local causes. They're not as attractive because they don't have the big names and you don't get to necessarily have a hashtag that's going to go viral, but they are doing the work. And for these national organizations, if you have a situation where you have an influx of cash, like what happened after the George Floyd death, then you have some sort of system in place to how you distribute that money, not just amongst Black Lives Matter chapters, which there are chapters that are complaining about not getting any money from the national organization because the national organization has criteria for them, but all kinds of organizations that are credible organizations that are already on the ground doing the work. That is a way of actually making sure that everybody wins. It's recycling dollars. It's putting money back into the communities. But even still, $60 million is not going to solve all the problems of Black America. Neither is $300 million. But there has to be some sort of system when you do have these massive influxes of cash and you don't have the way of scaling up quickly enough to do something with it. You don't have an infrastructure to do something with it. Then my proposal would be, we'll at least put in the research and the efforts to identify local organizations, Black Lives Matter or not, to give the money to and let them do something.
And I can tell you, all three of y'all, after the death of Breonna Taylor, there were individuals in Louisville who were complaining about Until Freedom.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
But then Until Freedom was telling people what local groups to support. I know some activists in Louisville felt one other activist used some money to buy a SUV and damn near ran her out of town. See, so what I'm laying out here is this conundrum. When you have one of these incidents and someone is killed and fundraising takes off, local groups, look, I'm Vice President Digital for the National Association of Black Journalists. We got local chapters who complain when we have the national convention in a city and say, we ain't getting none of that money.
Right.
So I can take you through numerous national organizations where chapters complain, y'all not helping us. The problem here, which is what Reese alluded to, and Kelly spoke of as well, that the problem here is you have already established entities that have infrastructure that are able to accept donations. I can tell you, oh man, I can't remember the brother's name. Oh man, I can't, Jaziri X.
Yeah, sure, Pittsburgh.
We were doing, I said, all right, I'm going to pick an organization to push on social media to give. I chose Jaziri X. He had no donate button on his website. And I was like, Jaziri, you're doing some great stuff. Bruh, how do we give? You need a donate button. There were a lot of entities that had no way of giving money because they did not have infrastructure.
Right.
So this thing is, I mean, it becomes, a catch-22 because, like, we got infrastructure, we don't, what do we do? And to Reese's point, that's a great point. How did Mike Brown and the folks there arrive at 20 million? Like, where did that number come from? And what are you going to do with 20 million? Now, what if BLM comes in and says, we're going to give $1 million to local organizers in Ferguson? Are folks going to reject it or accept it?
Accept.
I just think that this is a function of what happens when people reject established organizations, which that's their right. But if you don't create that thing the right way when you launch it, these are the headaches you're going to have.
It's true.
These are the headaches you're going to have.
Can I say one more thing, too? Because
final comment from each one of you before I go to break. Go.
Okay, yeah, I was looking at the comments in Facebook, and again, it goes back to what Dr. Carr said about this class tension. Somebody, for some strange reason, interpreted my comment to say that I don't want to be an activist. What I stated was, I'm not an activist, but I can contribute to the cause as a person who has skills such as project management, financial management, accounting.
Yeah, you're not defining yourself as an activist. That's all you're saying. You're like, that's not how I'm defining myself.
Right. But my point is, all of this stuff plays together. You can't have an infrastructure without people who have the skills to execute it. In my line of profession, I'm not a rocket scientist, but the rocket scientists need me to execute their program. And it's the same thing when it comes to activism. If you're going to accept money, if you're just out there marching on the streets and you're not a part of any affiliate, you're not affiliated and you're not getting money, more power to you. But when you have a $90 million organization, you need infrastructure. And so my whole point, which I just want to reiterate again, is when it comes to the infrastructure, then that's when you pull in to your point, Roland, Black people who have the skills, the law skills, the accounting skills, etc. You got to take some of the class tension out, take some of the purity politics out of it, and seek those people out. Because what ends up happening is when they do finally scale up, a lot of times they don't look at us. They look at the white folks or somebody else. They feel like they're more established or they're more credible. So we have the ability within our communities to build the infrastructure. It might not be with all the slogans and all of the purity politics, but seek those people out and marry that together, and then you can actually do something with the money that you're getting instead of having to sit there and account and then everybody's pissed off at you.
That's right. That's right. That's right. I would just agree with you, Reese. Everybody has skills they can contribute. And the only way we're going to advance collectively is to do it in collective formation, networks. Call on people who have these skills. One of the reasons that the federal government decided that the Black Panthers were the greatest threat to American national security was because they were organizing from the ground up. The liberation schools, the free breakfast programs, the health clinics, and they were calling on folks who had expertise. You didn't have to be a Panther to give somebody checkup. Read Robin Spencer's work on the Black Panthers and their medical, you know what I'm saying? But you wanted to lend your skills. Jeffrey Haas, who was the white dude who took the state of Illinois and Chicago and the feds to court on the murder of Fred Hampton. You know, they created the People's Law Center because the Panthers approached them in coalition with the Young Lords, with the Young Patriots, and say, look, we need lawyers. So, I mean, it's important to understand without coalition, we're not going to be able to advance. And finally, what we saw in Ferguson, now, maybe one of the reasons they're calling for $20 million is because, yes, this money isn't here because of Ferguson directly, but the catchment that kind of accrued over the last year during we've had this pandemic is a direct result of the fear from everybody from government to corporate America that there was about to be a purebred revolution in this country. So they threw some money to stop it. One of the reasons they may be holding on to the money is they don't know if they're going to get another windfall like this. And one of the reasons Ferguson folk are saying we want 20 million is because it is the momentum over the arc of this movement, this unbroken momentum that created the concept for these people to throw some money at. This is going to have to be worked out in some behind-the-scenes discussions, and everybody has a role to play. We just got to know how, as Reese said, we got to know where we can get in to fit in. That's all.
Kelly?
Exactly.
I agree with everyone on the panel. Like I said, once again, I don't have an issue with anything that anyone has said. I don't even have an issue with the comments that are coming in saying that I don't know what I'm talking about. I do. But what I will say is that regardless of where the money came from, BLM would not have been in a position to receive it at all had it not been for the people in Ferguson. So the fact that they are asking for anything at this point, the fact that they have to ask for anything at this point, when frankly Ferguson and the Michael Brown family is on their page front and center as basically a selling point to donate. The fact that they do not receive anything, at least that's my understanding from what I've seen thus far, they do not receive anything significant from BLM, that is insulting. And it is a disgrace to not only the movement as a whole, but to the Brown family, because their son died and they reached out for help. BLM comes through, you know, and we have this entire movement spurred from the pain of one family. And they are still struggling to keep their son's memory alive, even though BLM is frankly now profiting off of it. Even though the 90 million came from George Floyd, they profited off of the Brown family.
Where on their website are they doing that? Where? This is the site right here.
I'm literally the about page on blacklivesmatter.com under her story.
Gotcha. Under the about page, under her story.
In 2014, Mike Brown was murdered by Ferguson police. It was a guttural response to be with our people, our family, in support of the brave and courageous community of Ferguson and St. Louis as they were being brutalized by law enforcement.
Yeah, but you skipped over the top. This is the top.
I'm not skipping over the top.
Actually, hold up. Wait, hold up. I'm reading the top right now, Kelly. This is how it began. In 2013, 3 radical black organizers, go to my Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, created a black-centered political will and movement building project called Black Lives Matter. It was in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer, George Zimmerman. So here's the question. Does the Trayvon Martin family and the organizers in Sanford, Florida, and Orlando, should they get some money?
Absolutely.
All of it? No, but they absolutely should be getting something.
Right. No. Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying is, I'm reading the body of the article, and I do see where it mentions what took place with Mike Brown. But it also mentions Tamir Scott, Tanisha Anderson, Maya Hall, Walter Scott, Sandra Bland. Then it goes into what took place in Ferguson with Mike Brown. And so it has all of that. And so the point that I am making, the last paragraph, it says, the Black Lives Matter Global Network would not be recognized worldwide if it weren't for the folks in St. Louis and Ferguson who put their bodies on the line day in and day out and who continue to show up for Black lives. So, so what you just brought up raises the point that I brought up from the beginning. When we talk about supporting organizations, if we start going back to, well, like what kicked off, like what began something, I say it point blank, at the Ferguson protests took what was happening to another level. But it started with, this hashtag started with Trayvon Martin. Then after the death of Trayvon Martin, there were other cases that took place. Ayanna Jones in Detroit, Rekia Boyd in Chicago, Eric Garner in New York. So the question I'm still asking, which I still think national organizations have to answer, and that is, if you are a national organization and you were fundraising off of these major deaths of black people, what responsibility do you have to local organizers in those cities? What I'm saying is that I believe there is a responsibility not just for Ferguson, but also for Eric Garner in New York City, also for the black activists in Ohio with John Crawford III, also for the black activists BYM 100, I think it's black in Chicago with Rekia Boyd and Ayanna Jones. The biggest question that this brings is, how do you stand with local entities who typically kick these things off? Kenosha, are people providing any resources to local activists in Kenosha, Wisconsin? This, to me, is what BLM, the NAACP, and others, if you are a if you are a black group and you have gotten a windfall,
yes, sir,
because of these events,
say this, brother,
you too should be addressing this question, and not just BLM. BLM should be addressing it. And so that is the conundrum that I think folks are in, because the local organizers, yes, they are frustrated by saying, we still have work to do. Where y'all at? Where are the people? Where are all the people who, when I was in St. Louis, they were like, yo, where are the people who are all here, who made their names off of Ferguson?
Come on, brother.
Where are those individuals who have been going to the Aspen Institute, who have been going to, who become fellows at Harvard, and who have been with the United Nations across the world. See, it's a whole bunch of folk.
Come on, brother.
It's a whole bunch of folk not tied to BLM.
Unfiltered.
Who got some questions they got to have answered to, because they have benefited greatly from Ferguson and Eric Garner and all these other cases, and yes, George Floyd.
Yes.
Those are the questions that have to be asked. And so, look, we're going to continue asking them. Bottom line is, we created this platform to have this conversation. Is a whole bunch of other stories that I was going to get to, we're not getting to, but we got to be able to put this out there. We've got to be able to have people who want to talk about this. We got people who have to answer this, because if you are doing things in the public space on behalf of black people, then you have to be accountable to black people, which means that you have to be transparent. So since BLM did this here, I'm going to send an email and a text to Derek Johnson and Mark Morial and to Sherilyn Eiffel, and who now leads the Lawyers Committee and also Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. We're going to ask all of them, are y'all going to release a report on how much you've raised since the death of George Floyd? And what are your plans for it? To me, that's a legitimate question.
Sure.
I think it's a legitimate question. And we'll see what their response is. support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. After lots of internal criticism, the Black Lives Matter organization recently decided to give $3 million to members of the black community who are financially crippled by the pandemic. There are people who are saying that, hey, BLM has taken in more than $90 million in donations. They should be doing more for local chapters, also for the community. Through the organization's BLM Survival Fund, it has been giving grants of $1,000 to black activists. Black people are certainly struggling financially due to COVID-19, and black family members who have lost loved ones at the hands of law enforcement or while incarcerated. This move comes after the foundation exclusively shared with the Associated Press this week that it took over $90 million last year. The Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation says it wants to be known for more than just protests over the deaths of African Americans who have died at the hands of police. Joining me now is Melina Abdullah, co-founder of Black Lives Matter in L.A. Melina, I got to ask you this here. I'm not quite sure who was involved in this decision, but and this is just, again, this is specifically in terms of that deal there. I got a problem as a member of the black press with Black Lives Matter movement sharing the information exclusively with the Associated Press. Now, we're going to talk about the fund as well, but the reason I have a problem with that is because as somebody who has devoted nearly all of my professional career to black media, this is one of those stories that it helps for black media to be able to share it with our people. And when an AP has been sued by African Americans, AP has serious issues with race. And I think I get AP worldwide. I just think that when black organizations have information like this, they should say, hey, AP, we're going to share it with you, but we're also going to do it with black media in order to reach our people. Please take that back to Patrice and the others, because I've seen this with other groups where they give it to the New York Times, they give it to the Washington Post, and then when they don't get covered the second and third day, then they want to come to black media.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, one of the things I've said about you is that, I've often quoted the African proverb that until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. And I've often called you one of our lions. And you're absolutely right. And that critique is well taken. There is nothing wrong with offering criticism. And I accept that. And we won't do that again. And so I can say that you're absolutely right. You and many other members of the Black press have been ones to cover Black Lives Matter when people thought we were not going to be here any longer. You continued to cover us and you continued to share the work that we were doing, and we should have reached out to you first. So I apologize.
I certainly appreciate that. And let's talk about this fund. And so you made the announcement this $90 million has been taken in. And what exactly is this fund, and how do folks apply, how they qualify?
So we thought we were putting together a significant amount of money by creating this $3 million fund that was meant to be kind of our contemporary survival pending revolution, right? Which was a principle that was ushered in under the Black Power movement. That, you know, if you think about the Black Panther Party survival programs, it was about making sure that our people, that we offered as much as we could to make sure that our people had what they needed to survive. And so we knew that we couldn't fund every single Black person, but we thought it would go, at least a couple of days. We had $3 million set aside for $1,000 micro grants that were really no strings attached. You didn't have to demonstrate anything. You just had to say, well, why do you need the money? I can't pay my rent. I can't pay my utilities. There's medical bills, or I lost my job. My business is about to close. And as long as you were Black, you got that $1,000. That money went almost immediately. And so we're now working to raise additional resources in hopes that we'll be able to provide more funds. But we're also challenging those, especially corporations and individuals who've made massive profits in the midst of this health pandemic with an unprecedented economic fallout that disproportionately is levied upon Black folks. We're saying people like Jeff Bezos, corporations like Amazon, right, who have record profits, they can do far more than $3 million. And so we need to put pressure on them. We also need to put pressure on the government. And in some ways, a lot of folks have been comforted by the fact that the form of white supremacy that we now see isn't as blatant or violent. But when you think about what it means that we're talking about a $2,000 stimulus check, it'll partially pay for rent one time, but you have countries in this world that are saying, well, we need stimulus checks every month. And that's what we're saying, that we need stimulus checks every month. And there's organizations, there's corporations, there's individuals, and there's government that's much more well equipped to provide these kinds of dollars, beginning with the Black community, than is Black Lives Matter.
It's also important because let me be real clear, folks who are watching. What I'm about to say is not just specific to Black Lives Matter. It's also for the NAACP that's raised, my understanding, more than $100 million. Well over $100 million. That money was given because of Black people. And so, to your point about the Panthers, what Black people are saying is the money needs to be used for Black people. It needs to be judicious, and that is examining. Is it being used for internal purposes? Is it being used to fund the chapters, to fund the organizations, to fund the things that they want to do? And that really, really is critically important, because if you are, like in my case, when I ask my fan base to give, I'm saying we're spending it here. We're covering this. We're going and we're covering this. The people need to see the results of what is being done with the money.
Absolutely. And I would go further than that, actually, because more than Black Lives Matter and more than the NAACP, money was also given to white-led organizations like the ACLU, who has made far more than the $100 million in your mentioning.
Yep.
So what kind of pressure are we putting on those organizations and institutions? So you're absolutely right. The money has to go to Black community. Black Lives Matter raised roughly $90 million. There was an impact report that was released that talks about how that money has been used. That impact report says that basically we gave away about 25%, a little more than 25% of what we raised, and that's before the survival fund, to Black-led organizations to do work on the ground. So that $90 million is intended to not just go in the pockets of Black people, although there's survival money that's necessary, but also to do the work of institution building. And, you know, there's organizations that have been around. I think ACLU is over 100 years old now, right, that have had an opportunity to institution build. NAACP should be institution building, right? Institution building is also important, because if Black Lives Matter were to give away every single dollar of the $90 million, that would be the end of Black Lives Matter, and we wouldn't have the capacity to continue to do the work in the streets. I think what's recommended, and you know, I have a whole nother job, so this is also important to
Right. This is not their day job.
Right. That Black Lives Matter organizers, we do this work because we know it to be our sacred duty. I believe I was called into this work by the Creator, by my ancestors, and I do this work as heart work and spirit work and soul work. but we're not being paid by the movement. And so the dollars that go into Black Lives Matter actually do direct work on the ground. And we want to make sure that we have the dollars to continue to do that direct work on the ground and build up an institution that really can be abolitionist in nature by upending unjust systems, and also abolitionist in terms of ushering in the kind of world in which we want our children to inherit.
And see, let me be. And here's the thing for people out there, and then I'm gonna go to questions from my panel. There are no issues, and I'm gonna be real clear to anybody who's watching. In order to have successful organizations, you have to have infrastructure. In order to have infrastructure, you got to be able to hire people, maintain people, keep those people. And Melina, the thing that, because if we study organizations historically, that's what SCLC, Urban League, NAACP, they all had those different things there. And so when people say, man, they sitting here getting rich, no, what you do is you're able to pay folks to live, because you can't ask people to just constantly give of themselves and not be able to pay their rent, pay their lights, pay food, send their kids to college, all those different things along those lines. But what I do hear from other Black Lives Matter chapters and activists is that you also have to, and what I'm about to say, I've heard the exact same thing from NAACP chapters. I've heard NAACP chapters say, national, y'all got to be doing more funding your state branches and your local branches. So this is not a solely BLM conversation. This is what, and look, I'm Vice President Digital for the National Association of Black Journalists. We hear the exact same thing from our chapters. This is what happens when you have organizations, and we have to recognize that, but the key here is transparency. I think the key here is constantly being transparent with what is going on so people know, and then you don't have people just with misinformation, disinformation, making up stuff, spreading lies. That's the most important thing.
Absolutely, which is why we issued the impact report, so people could see where did that $21 million that we gave in 2020, where did it go? Who, what organizations were funded through that money? Right. And then you're right about being able to hire and being able to have staff. I'm very fortunate that my day job that pays me gives me flexibility. I have flexibility in being able to dedicate so much time to Black Lives Matter without being paid. But it shouldn't just be that because I'm a professor and can kind of merge my paid job with my life's work, that's why I can contribute, right? It should be that people who work retail can also say, you know what, maybe I can do some work here and be compensated for that work. So we're beginning to think about how to build infrastructure, how to make sure that we have the things that we need, that we're not constantly begging for free photocopies and water and signs and people to print stuff for us for free, right? That we can use the dollars that we've generated to, again, build institution that's enduring. And that's what, really this last kind of moment of uprising, this watershed moment that did bring tremendous resources to Black Lives Matter is. And then finally, and I'll break after this, is, we need people to be a little patient. This is our first real money. We didn't have money before 6 or 8 months ago, right? Black Lives Matter was funded out of the pockets of people like me and Baba Akili and Sister Jan, who are just, I'm a professor, but I'm also a single mom, and I'm also a working class person. People can Google what my salary is, right? And so it's because I cook instead of going out that we were able to fund Black Lives Matter for the last 7 years. And so this is our first bit of money, and we want it to be righteous and deliberate with how that money is used so that we can make sure that there is a Black Lives Matter going forward for many, many years and prayerfully generations to come.
Melina Abdullah, I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much.
All right. All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends. Go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.